Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I am happy that all of you can join me this early Monday morning. I have to be honest with you. I am dragging ass this morning. Last night was rough. I just wide awake the entire night. And then what sucks about it is, you have to be up early in the morning. Nevertheless, I am here, and I'm glad that all of you can join me while you are here. What the hell? My settings are screwed. That was the other thing that happened this morning. As I got to my console, everything had been erased, and I'm not quite sure why. That's okay. We are here. We are here. That's all that matters. Shout out to my chat, the Skeptical Jerk, Jinho Choi, Holly Holmes, Lilo the dog, Alexander G. Shout out to all of you and thank you all for joining me. We have a fantastic show for you today. Of course, we're going to have a conversation with Mark Sloboda about the complete meltdown of one Zelensky. I am super curious on what Mark has to say about this. I imagine he is going to have some feelings. I would imagine they're going to be pretty jovial. Also, I am super curious on whether or not Zelensky has any other clothing in his wardrobe. Have you noticed that? Like, usually, if you see people on random days, they would have on different outfits because most people don't have the same outfit in their closet. Now, either Zelensky just doesn't wash his clothes or he just wears the same outfit every day, says, screw it. This is what I'm going to wear. Or, even weirder, he has 100 of the same janitor outfit, which is even more mind-blowing, right? Like, because every time you see him, he's wearing the exact same thing. And so, is it he wakes up in the morning, takes a shower, maybe, and then says, okay, well, what am I wearing today? Oh, I know, I'll wear the same janitorial outfit that I typically wear. Is that it? Because to me, that is weirder than him wearing the same thing over and over and over and over again. I could be wrong. Like, you have some people who have very similar taste, but he has decided upon janitorial chic, and he has rocked janitorial chic poorly. If I remember correctly, even in his Vogue photo album, if you remember, he was doing the Vogue Spritz. I think it was janitorial chic. Now, personally, if I was the Russians, I would have taken that Vogue photo shoot and I would have sprinkled it all on the front lines. Here's your leader. This is him rocking his Vogue photo shoot. But I need to bring in my guest. I am joined with the one and only Mark Sloboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. He is easily one of my favorite people to talk to. My man, what's going on today, Mark? How you doing?
Jamaro, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
No, man, it's always an honor and a pleasure to have you. Mark, before we get started, I have to hit upon the hissy fit that took place at the White House. I want to get your take on it, just to give a quick snippet of it. This was Zelensky and Trump. It took place Friday. I've never seen anything like this, but I definitely want your take on it. And just so the audience would know, Zelensky went to the Oval Office, and it was an F fest, to put it mildly. Here's a clip.
And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. And what you're doing is...
So, Mark, Zelensky, hissy fit? You can laugh. It's funny. You know it's funny.
No, I mean, it is. I mean, the exact words I use to describe it on our RT were the enfant terrible, the terrible infant, right? He threw a petulant tantrum.
Yes, he did. I've never seen anything like this.
He has been created into he has such a sense of entitlement. He is such a spoiled brat, and not not just in terms of what he gets, but of how he is used to being treated by Western elites and leaders. And here you have a Western leader, in fact, now the leader of what has been up until now, at least, the Kiev regime's most important and largest patron, right, by far. And that patron has changed its attitude towards him with the new administration completely. And my first reaction upon only seeing the 10-minute clip that I think most people have seen was, wow, this was some kind of tag team between Trump and Vance. This was some kind of ambush, right?
I don't think so.
No, it's not. That was my first take, right? But if you watch the entire 50 minutes, the 40 minutes of conversation before them, and then so it was clear off the bat, right, that Trump was a little peeved.
Annoyed.
Annoyed, whatever, pissed off at Zelensky because Zelensky refused to wear a suit, right? And the Kiev regime side had been warned in advance by the White House, this is a formal event, right? And suits are inspected, right? Your neo-fascist Che Guevara chic is just not going to cut it. And it has to be said that the rest of Zelensky's team, which usually struts about like he does, right, put on suits. Even Yermak, his Gray Cardinal chief of staff, whom we haven't seen in a suit in quite some time, put on a suit. And considering his build, he looked much better for it, I have to say. But Zelensky still didn't. So right off the bat, when Trump greeted him as he arrived in the White House out the car and made a little, he joked, took a little shot at him. Oh, I see you dressed up, because he was wearing all fascist black, right?
That's right.
Yeah, with the Ukrainian symbol. But they weren't going to make a huge deal out of it. They got their point, and then they sat down, and this was a bit unusual. Usually when a foreign leader comes over, there's a brief question and answer before or after with the press, but it's pro forma. This was an extended conversation with them to the press before they went to what was supposed to be the substance of this meeting, which was the signing of this resource deal, which is being presented in the press as a rare earths or minerals deal. So Zelensky had originally refused this deal because it's not very favorable on economic terms. It's not favorable on economic terms at all to the Kiev regime, right?
It's 50% of everything.
It's economic colonialism, right?
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, I mean, including on things like ports and infrastructure and
oil,
everything.
Gas.
Oil, gas. And here's the thing: is it's being presented as that like Ukraine is some treasure trove of minerals just waiting to be exploited. It'll make anyone rich, and it's not the case, right? I mean, they've got some minerals. Some of them rare earths. Again, first of all, not that rare. Second of all, I mean, there's plenty of them in the United States. There's far more of them in Russia, right? They're around the world. It's just that they're not always easy or profitable or practical to extract, right? In most cases, you have to destructively strip mine huge swaths of lands and filter it, right? Because that's what you have to do to get the rare earth. They're not like big ore, chunks of ore, like you might get with, normal metals and things like that. So the reason why the rare earths in Ukraine, have not been exploited yet to any significant degree is because they will require a huge amount of investment in infrastructure without any necessary guarantee of turning a significant profit off of it, right? And again, you have the fact that 70% of Ukraine's, what mineral wealth they do have, right, is already in Russian-controlled territory, as Forbes, pointed out over, we're looking at it like 2 weeks ago now. But so Zelensky initially said no. Then he received a second offer, right, that has slightly different terms, but amounts to the same thing. It establishes a fund, right? And it's no longer guaranteed. It actually might in long term end up being worse because the first one at least tapped out at 500 billion, right, which is what Trump claims that he wants, that Zelensky owes the United States. But the new one didn't even have that. There was no cap. It was just into perpetuity. There was no real concrete legal framework, right, for this deal. This deal was little more than a message of intent, right? It was not a concrete deal. There was very little, there was no legal backing here. There was no details. It was a political gesture for the most part. Now, the Europeans then convinced Zelensky to accept it. And the argument they made was, look, Trump is ready to walk away, right? He doesn't like you. He doesn't like us. He's not interested in this. We need to tie him in. And he's refusing to give Ukraine security guarantees, right? Right. We're not interested in a peace process without already having security guarantees agreed to, which means a commitment not just of U.S. weapons and so forth, but almost certainly U.S. troops, right? And NATO without calling it NATO. And it has to be said that Biden had never made security guarantees to Ukraine either. There was lots of talk about it, but it was never done either. So there's that there. We need some kind of security guarantees to either avert or at least, have this reassurance going into a peace process that if the war restarts, oops, we shelled Ukraine and we shelled Russia and blamed it on the Russians, something like that, then suddenly the U.S. is at war with Russia, right? That's actually the scenario that they want. Exactly. But the U.S. was not willing to offer those. Trump was not willing to offer any type of security guarantees to Ukraine whatsoever. So they said, look, we're going to get you the security guarantees. First, they made the argument that this deal, while it doesn't, the U.S., Trump wouldn't explicitly agree to any security guarantees in the deal, in return for this. There's kind of what they're saying are implicit security guarantees. It gives the U.S. an economic investment in Ukraine that they would want to get their money out of the deal. And then Trump himself specifically talked about if there's U.S. workers on the ground, right, exploiting this stuff, then no one will touch them, right, because they're Americans, which is just nonsense, of course, because no company is going to put their people on the ground in an active war field, whether they're initially being directly targeted or not. And if anyone thinks that Russia wouldn't, target them on the ground, I think they're horribly wrong in that regard. But this was the argument presented, that it's some type of implicit security guarantee. The other thing, because this was part of a tag team effort over the last week, because it was preceded by trips by both Macron, the president of France, and the prime minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, to Washington to meet with Trump. And they knew that Trump was dead set against security guarantees for Ukraine. And their argument was, we want to put 30,000 troops, European troops, on the ground, mostly British and French and some others. But, and they're not calling it now a peacekeeping force. They're using this new woke term to describe it. Reassurance force, right? So when there's a ceasefire, we'll put a reassurance force, right? Which is another way of saying human tripwires, right? And they don't even want them on the front lines. What they're talking about is putting them in the rear, just with the idea, right? There's two ideas here. One is that they believe that if they put European troops on the ground, that Russia won't touch them because that would mean war with Europe, and Russia's afraid of that, or won't go down that road. Okay. Again, Russia has said again and again, if there's any foreign troops, in the conflict zone, they will be targets, right?
Targeted,
They have said that from the beginning, and they've done it repeatedly against non-official troops that were there assisting the Kiev regime on many occasions in this conflict that the West is not admitting to, right? Mm-hmm. The second they believe is that if Russia did target them, then they would go crying to the U.S. and that whatever Donald Trump says now, that the public pressure, NATO, everything would be on Trump to then enter on their side, right?
He won't.
That ultimately, whatever he may say, that he'll be dragged into. Okay, but that's their belief. Third of all, they still have some delusional belief that they actually have capable militaries, despite everything that their own military audits and press have reported about their military. And they're still living in this fantasy land where Russians are fighting with shovels and have no morale. And that if Western troops and Western weapons show up on the horizon, the Russians will just run away. They are still living in la la land. They're still living in this bubble of their own propaganda. They're still drinking their own Kool-Aid. Right. So that's the logic there. So what they were going to ask Trump for, you won't give security guarantees for Kiev, right? But will you give security guarantees for us if we put troops on the ground? You said you want us to do the heavy lifting. Well, we'll be the ones to put troops down there. You just provide us with intelligence and logistics and air cover, which would mean a no-fly zone, which would mean engaging the entire Russian Air Force and air defense network over, Ukraine. You just do that, right? And we'll take the rest, right? They're thinking of playing to you. You said you want us to carry the burden of the Ukraine. Well, here we're offering to do it. All we just need is a backstop from you, meaning that all of these security guarantees that all of these European countries have presented to Ukraine, including the UK, most recently with Keir Starmer, right? 100 years, of security guarantee promised with Ukraine. It means absolutely nothing because they're afraid of Russia.
Right.
They shouldn't be afraid of Russia, even with the U.S., but they're afraid, of going against Russia without the U.S. to back them up. And to the point, in the conversation, Macron and Starmer both tried to pin Trump down and get him to promise this, and he casually deflected them left and right and wouldn't make any guarantees or promises at all, and they went away with nothing. But he asked Keir Starmer dead point blank at one point, could you take on the Russians on your own? And
right here,
Keir Starmer,
I got that clip, by the way.
There was crickets chirping for a minute, and then there was this nervous laugh and a deflection.
They laughed at him. I mean, he used right here. I love this, and I'm glad you brought this up.
The world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's.
Could you take on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
the room laughs. Like the entire room just laughs at him. Like they use like British weakness as a joke.
It's not just British weakness, right? It's assumed that question was not just for the UK, but all of Europe together. And I mean, a lot of people aren't paying attention to these things, but the British press has, on one level, of course, it's got its propaganda and its jingoism and everything. At the same time, there are so many assessments of the sorry state of the British military, how they can't even get enough people to meet their recruitment demand, something the U.S. has had problems with up until Trump was elected, by the way, and they suddenly changed their advertising policy away from BS, the woke BS that they've been advertising with, right? And they refused service to transvestites and the like. Now under Trump, suddenly enlistment numbers evidently are sharply up. Yeah. But the UK, and they have all kinds of military, but it's not just that. They gave all of their howitzers, they gave all of their artillery pieces to Ukraine already. Same thing with artillery, right? They have less than 2 or 3 days of artillery and shells and ammunition for high intensity war with Russia. 2 or 3 days. France is not in much better shape, again, according to their own military assessments of where they are. All the European countries, even you roll them all together, they're not paper tigers, because even on paper they look like chihuahuas. That's the cold reality, right?
Yeah.
So that's why they're so desperate. Yeah, we'll put troops on the ground as human tripwires, but we need the U.S. to back them up. So they needed security guarantees for the U.S. for their security guarantees to Ukraine, and that's what they promised.
Outrageous.
We'll get you. So a combination of tying the U.S. in with these economic interests and with security guarantees for us will effectively give you security guarantees. That was their argument. And all Zelensky had to do was sit there and shut up and sign this stupid deal, right? And even by going through this, all right, Trump initially wanted this as something that would be signed at the ministerial level, right? That's why he sent his Secretary of Treasury just over a week earlier to Kiev, and he got screamed at by Zelensky, right? They did not want a face-to-face meeting. They were already peeved at Zelensky over wrangling over this deal and everything. And they were against this. In fact, as late as during the week, Macron evidently pushed, be careful what you wish for, people, pushed for Trump to go ahead and meet with Zelensky. And the reason why Zelensky wants this is because if Zelensky is seen as signing this, whether that again has any legal or thing, that is Trump accepting him as the president of Ukraine. That's legitimization, right?
That's interesting. You're right. I guess on some level, yeah.
Yeah, that all the talk about elections and everything would go away, probably, if not be incredibly more muted. How can you say that the guy's not legitimate after he just agreed to sign away half of his country's wealth to you, right?
That's so
right?
wrong.
So that was a big motivation for Ukraine as well. So they went ahead with this. And, they sat down there, and Zelensky is, for the most part, being quiet, answering questions when asked. JD.Vance is sitting there quietly as well. And what exchange there is between Trump and Zelensky. And it was mostly amicable for the 40 minutes, right? That's why they don't show you those 40 minutes, because they're fairly unremarkable. And then Trump said, we'll take one more question and then we'll go and we'll sign this thing and have lunch and we'll do a press briefing and it'll all be over, right? There was a question about Trump's, a question from a Polish journalist about the way that he is engaging with Putin. And Trump started talking back how, what good, you want to call Putin names? Well, what good would calling Putin names? Biden was calling Putin names, and where has that brought us? Right. We need to do diplomacy. That's
can't make a deal like that.
Kid yard stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And at that point, JD.Vance jumped in, and JD.Vance, shall we say, more eloquently and coherently made the same argument. Right.
Yes.
And it was mostly an argument against the Biden administration. But he pointed out, we're going to do diplomacy. And that's where Zelensky lost it. Right. And for the first time, he challenged, and he didn't speak to the cameras now. He was speaking to JD Vance and Trump. And what's more is he called the vice president of the United States to his face in the Oval Office, JD. Right? Not Mr. Vice President, right? Which, would be the
Appropriate.
preferred way. Yeah. Again, he was trying to do this in English, right? He believes he has wonderful English skills. He's been told before by his own people, look, your English is, about as good as your Ukrainian, because he's a native Russian speaker, which is to say not that good. You should be dealing, you're the head of state, right, of a Ukrainian speaking country. You should be doing this through interpreter. He believes he has wonderful English skills and has always avoided this. And he speaks better English than I do Ukrainian. I'll admit that. But, if you're the head of state, you use a translator, right? Putin speaks English, right? But he always uses a translator for anything formal, right? Anything in front of the cameras, anything that requires actual, agreement as head of state, with whoever is dealing with. And this just blew up into a fracas because Zelensky didn't stop. All he had to do was shut up at nearly any point, right until the end, and he didn't. And he tried talking over the president of the United States.
Yes, he
right.
did.
I mean, and whatever you may think of Trump, he was elected the president of the United States, and Zelensky is the head of a proxy regime, right? You don't talk over the president of the United States. You shut up and you nod, and we can agree. And at one point they even said, why are they JD Vance, why are you trying to litigate this in front of the press?
Mark,
right?
let me show a clip of this just so the people have a context of what we're talking about, because it's astonishing. Again, never seen anything like it. I'm going to play this out just for a bit, just for the audience to get a feel for what took place. There are far more clips than this, by the way. I'm just playing this one.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come to the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to
count once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this.
I'm not
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. Yeah, you're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country.
Oh, this is fascinating,
Just
man.
Look at him rolling his eyes and sighing like a petulant teenager, right? I mean, it's just amazing. And he was told beforehand, look, this is the final deal. You're not going to get explicit security guarantees. We're going to go down a diplomatic path, right? You're going to agree with this, right? And then we'll sign this and we'll have some type of implicit guarantee. That's the best you're going to get, right? But we're not going to renegotiate this. We're not going to, rehash these arguments. This is what we're doing. And he just couldn't accept that, right? He went, I don't know, on this fit of indignation, right? In front of the press in the Oval Office, arguing and trying to talk over the vice president and the president of the United States in a situation where they don't like this guy. They don't like his regime. They don't really care about his country, right? To begin with, right? So at that point, they're like, all right, and they kicked him out. They kicked him out, and now they're talking today. The New York Times is reporting that Trump is meeting and is considering stopping all military aid, all intelligence, everything else to the Kiev regime, right? Which will put them in a very bad situation.
Yep. It's like, is that ham sandwich? Take it out of his mouth. Grab that ham sandwich.
It was. Yeah. Look, he when he blew up at the question of diplomacy, right? Vance mentioned diplomacy. He's like, what kind of diplomacy? That's what kicked it off. He doesn't even want a diplomatic process. Right?
And Trump even pointed it out. He was like, this is what I have to work with. And he says, I'm glad that the American
He's glad that it happened in front. Yeah, and he is. He's going to take this to the bank. So not only are they not signing this nonsense, political gesture deal, right? But he just gave Trump the excuse that he needs to walk away from this.
Well,
Trump is pushing for.
No, please finish.
Trump is pushing for a ceasefire, right? He believes that a ceasefire will kick it off. Certainly, the Kiev regime desperately needs a ceasefire, right? It needs, because that time, that's why Russia won't agree to a ceasefire. We've been down this road before, right? With the Minsk, both rounds of the Minsk Accords, with the Istanbul communique when we pulled back from Kiev and everything else. No, you're just going to use it to rearm and retrain, and no, until there is a permanent agreed upon solution on our terms, no ceasefire, none. And all the West keeps talking is about a ceasefire, and we'll put troops on the ground on the ceasefire. And presumably, why Zelensky is so against the ceasefire, so vocally against the ceasefire, I can only presume that it is because his own Banderite forces, his own ultra-nationalists, would be against that. They would see that as some type of capitulation, and that's why he's always insisted on no ceasefire. You have to consider how fragile this regime is and how important it depends on these Banderites in its military and security forces ranks. So, but all he had to do, is go through this and say something like, I might be willing to agree to a ceasefire if Russia agrees to a ceasefire. Throw it back on Putin. Make Putin say no, right? And then it's Putin who is responsible for the diplomatic process not moving forward, and that Trump would be angry. But he's too stupid to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
It's childish. I mean,
it's exactly why Russia has never wanted him dead or removed him. It's because almost anyone else would be a more capable diplomat and leader for their country than Zelensky.
Where does this leave Zelensky and Ukraine now? I mean, it was something that Trump said in the meeting, effectively, I empowered you to be a tough guy by effectively giving you money and aid and everything else, which hints at this idea of, okay, if I empowered you to be a tough guy, I need you to not be that tough guy with my empowerment. Basically, figure this out on your own. Is that where Trump goes from here on out? I know you don't know that as a flat fact, but is that
what he specifically said is that in the negotiation process, Zelensky feels empowered and feels that he has an advantage because he has the U.S. backing. But Trump is saying he doesn't actually have an advantage. What he's not saying is because the U.S. itself isn't in an advantageous process, and he's admitted that Putin holds all the cards, that Russia has all the advantages on the battlefield in this situation, right, and everything. He has been pushing for Zelensky to go ahead with this, and because he's refusing so much. Trump made the argument after this, fracas in the White House, that, well, maybe I should pull all my support from you and show you what kind of real diplomatic position you're in.
Right.
And immediately Zelensky, first of all, he canceled a speech at the Hudson Institute that he was supposed to do, right? I don't know whether the Hudson Institute canceled it or he did, but it was canceled. He did go on Fox News, right, where he, in an interview, refused to apologize to the president of the United States. Evidently, Macron and Keir Starmer were immediately working the phones, trying to get him back into the White House, just let him sign the deal. Just let him sign the deal. He's so sorry. He's so sorry. Right. And then he said, I'm not sorry. I'm not apologizing on air. Right. And, there was a point during, right when the argument actually started with JD.Vance, where JD.Vance started making the argument more forcefully. And if you listen closely, you will hear a brief, something comes out of Zelensky's mouth. He mutters under his breath.
Did he say it?
Yeah, he did. He did. I mean, every Russian speaker knows what he said, right?
They call him a bitch. He called JD.Vance. He called the vice president of the United States,
right? He used Russian mot. And you have, first of all, understand, in English, there's like 7 swear words, and you use them in every Hollywood movie and everything. In Russian, mot is much more powerful, right? It's much more negative. And there's a lot more of it. There's entire dictionaries of Russian mot. Swearing in Russian is an art form. And I must say that my wife doesn't let me learn mot, right? She refuses to let me learn mot, right? It means a lot more, right? It's a lot more offensive. And he muttered under his breath, "Suko blia," which is like saying, all right, so the YouTube audience here, right? We can't push the YouTube censors too far, but he called him a female dog that was engaged in crass fornication.
Oh, gee. Jeez.
Right?
How do you call the VP a bitch?
Yeah.
That's astonishing.
I mean, again, stronger than that, right? In front of his face.
I know, but I'm going with the
world's press.
DC version.
Right? Yeah. So, I mean, again, the man is such a terrible diplomat, a leader for his country engaging in other countries. But he went home, he went back to the UK, and he was greeted in Europe as if he was a conquering hero. He was practically Caesar given triumphs on the street. Every European leader, be brave, be fearless, right? They're all tweeting at him, "We're with you," blah, 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 right? The entire leadership of Europe, minus Orban and Fico, of course, right, are lining up with Zelensky against the president of the United States. Can you imagine them in the Kremlin? Could you imagine them, right? I mean, they just must have been rolling on the floor laughing. This plays into Russia's hands so well, right? I mean, not only is Kiev likely to lose U.S. support out of this, right? But the damage done to the transatlantic relationship and potentially to NATO, I'm not saying that NATO is going to fall apart, right? Within the next few weeks or even the next few years, but the damage done to this already is huge. Yeah. It's huge. And now the Europeans are meeting again, and over the weekend, they have moved forward, and Keir Starmer is with his paltry British forces and dreams of Britain being a great power. He has taking the lead, and he has declared a coalition of the willing
right here this clip right here. Here he is.
Yep.
First, we will keep the military aid flowing and keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia to strengthen Ukraine now. Second, we agreed that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and Ukraine must be at the table. Third, in the event of a peace deal, we will keep boosting Ukraine's own defensive capabilities to deter any future invasion.
This is so silly. Like,
Right.
they
So,
have no
first
power
of all,
to do
Ukraine
anything.
has no sovereignty, right? They haven't had any sovereignty since 2014, since the government was overthrown in a Westpac putsch, right?
Mhm.
Second of all, they're saying de facto NATO.
Exactly.
That's what they're saying right there, right?
Exactly.
This is one of Russia's key demands, right? Even if no official NATO, we're going to keep. And von der Leyen called for, the porcupine strategy. We'll pack them so full of steel, blah blah blah, so full of weapons. And I'm like, you and what army? Because all the
they haven't been able to
European
do
reports,
it currently
the
with all of NATO.
CEO of the primary German military-industrial complex conglomerate, Rheinmetall, said just over a week ago that European military stocks are empty, right? Yep. And he was doing that in explaining why the Europeans weren't being invited to the discussions, right? And were at the little kids' table with Ukraine, even though Trump and Putin actually, have not talked at all about Ukraine. The negotiations in Riyadh were just about diplomatic bilateral relations between the U.S. They haven't really discussed Ukraine yet. They haven't even begun, right? So, but regardless of that, the CEO of Rheinmetall said, we have no hard power because we have no military power, and that gives us no political power. That's why we're the little kids at the table. We're not
These
a great
goofballs are talking to themselves. And they keep talking to them. Like, I am always astonished that they make these proclamations just to themselves. Like,
it's an echo chamber. They're bouncing this off of each other.
Hasn't invited them to the table. The U.S. is not going to invite them to the table. And they're like, we will be, when any peace deal is signed, we will have our troops on the ground. It's like, okay, dude, no, you won't. No, you won't.
And and which just part of the rationale there is that we know Russia will never agree with that and the war will go on.
Yeah.
Right. Just by saying it, we know Russia will never accept that. Right. And so the war will go on, which is what we want anyway.
Well, maybe I'm making assumptions. I'll ask you, can they gum up the works? I mean, I know Kellogg is
absolutely
having them at the baby table, but
yeah, sure. All they have to do is for Kiev to say no diplomacy. We're going to continue fighting, right? Which is what Russia wants anyway. Russia wants to finish this on the ground. They don't want any terms imposed on them by some peace deal with Trump, because they'd have to say no anyway, right? And then the onus for the diplomatic failure would be on them, right? This is perfect for them. Now the failure can be presented by Trump as on Zelensky, and that gives Trump all the room he needs to do what he wants to do, probably, which is to walk away from this. Then Russia can just go for Kiev and finish this on the ground, and there'll be no wrangling over details, no talk of NATO or European or whatever troops on the ground, no more weapons for the Kiev regime, because there won't be a Kiev regime, right? That gives Russia the space. And Russia is preparing according to reports, take that for what it's worth, but very large offensives for this late spring and summer. Very large offensives, probably something in the direction of Kiev, right? That is entirely possible. At the very least, Zaporozhye city and other areas. Russia, at the very least, wants to take the rest of Donbass and Zaporozhye city and Kherson city across the Dnieper,
Odessa,
and finish driving the Kiev regime out of their Kursk incursion in Suja before there's any real diplomacy. And now the Trump the people are saying outright, we need a new leader in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
We can't deal with Zelensky. And how is that going to be done, right? Zelensky is refusing to hold elections still. Supposedly, he spoke to Zelensky, who was exiled as the former Kiev regime's top general. He was exiled to the position of ambassador to the UK, which is not really what he's doing there. He's there in political exile. But supposedly Zelensky spoke to him while he was there. And I would imagine that they want him sidelined, right? They want to make sure that he's under control and that he's not being groomed by the US or anyone else. Not that that would be any better for this situation, because Zelensky is a committed Banderite fascist, right? He is a full scale. He had 2 busts of Stepan Bandera and one of Shukovich and the red and black flag in his office when he was the commander-in-chief of the military.
Zelensky was being threatened with jail time.
Bandera.
Correct me if I'm wrong, he's been threatened with jail time. Basically, if you come
I
back
mean,
and run against me.
He was being threatened with all kinds of BS investigations and yes, all sorts of legal proceedings and everything else. I mean, look at once again, Zelensky, the Zelensky regime charged the leaders of all the major opposition parties, even opposition Maidan parties, with treason, including the former leader of the Kiev regime, the candy oligarch Poroshenko. And while the West, convinced him to quietly drop that affair, since the Kellogg and then Trump brought up elections in Ukraine again, they increased the pressure again, and suddenly, Poroshenko is wanted for treason again. So he is trying to take any potential political opponent off the table. But even so, if they did have elections, right? Elections, quote unquote, with all real non-Maidan opposition banned in the country, right? Which is, not real elections. It's sham elections. It's like everything that has happened in Ukraine since the West-backed Maidan putsch, and the voices of East Ukrainians were lustrated and silenced and pogromed and everything else. That way, only more so. But that would take months and months and months, assuming that someone just doesn't get rid of Zelensky. The shield of protection is off of Zelensky, right? The U.S. shield of protection. And the U.S. has openly indicated they want someone else. Knives could easily come out in Ukraine over this, right? There's lots of people that support the regime, right? In general, the Maidan regime, but hate Zelensky, right? A lot of political opponents, right, that have been, enduring this tin pot delusional emperor for quite a while because he had U.S. support. Now he doesn't have it, and he might have full-throated European support, right? But is that enough to protect him? I don't think so.
Well, from my point of view, Europe can have $20 trillion. You still got to buy the weapons from somewhere. And if America says no, then what?
Also, not only that, but let's say they were able to buy all the way. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the manpower, right?
How long can they last?
They still are dancing around a mobilization of down to 18-year-olds, right? Because of the domestic political repercussions, because they've got this demographic narrowing and there'll be no future for the country when these young men die, so on and so on. It's a tough situation. But the hope is still to drag the U.S. into this. And Europe, after agreeing supposedly now among themselves with the coalition of the willing, they're going to Washington, D.C. again this week.
Are they?
Rehash the same thing again, right? Supposedly with a stronger show of force and commitment of troops this time, but they still are going to demand a U.S. backstop. They're going to say, we'll pay for it, right? With what? Debt. They're all, all the European powers are ridiculously in debt, right? They don't have the military industrial complex. They can't, even the U.S. can't How many times has it been said already by the NATO secretary in general? Even with the U.S., Russia is outcompeting all of NATO put together in military industrial terms for the type of weapons needed for this conflict by 3 times. That's even with the U.S., right?
Mark, question
Now,
on the UK. So correct me if I'm wrong. The UK signed a 100-year agreement with Ukraine. Part of that agreement included mineral rights. So how are they also doing mineral rights with the United States?
It's
That's
all
what you meant with
fiction.
this nonsense.
The 100-year security agreement was fiction. This mineral rights deal was fiction. This is all meant to rope the U.S. back into this conflict. No, this is all what all of this is about, right?
Also, Europe is, what I don't get is that Ukraine is losing the war.
Yeah.
Even the West acknowledges that they were losing the war at this point, meaning if the negotiations are purely on the issue of Ukraine, then there are no negotiations. Russia's perfectly content to keep going, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
Certainly they know, just gaming it out, that Russia has the target. Any European troop that comes in, because it's a nose under the camel's tent if they don't. So when these guys are out there saying we're going to put troops in, they have to know that this is effectively, you are risking a third world war.
Okay, they don't know that. They don't know that. They don't believe that.
How can they not know that?
They live in their own delusional world, right? So they've got fallbacks of logic. First one, if we put our troops on the ground, that's NATO troops on the ground protected by Article 5, and Russia, whatever they say, won't dare to attack our troops in Ukraine. 2, if they do attack our troops, whatever Trump may say now, he'll be forced to come and save us. So they're there, if not as a deterrent, then as a human tripwire. They never expect, and third, a lot of them read their papers, read even their top generals. They're all delusional, right? The heads of their military, everything, they still believe that they have some great military forces and that
That's
Russians
amazing.
are fighting, which they buy into their own problem. You've got different layers of delusion and arguments. If you read their articles, their papers, their statements that they fall back on, but they do not accept the World War III argument, right? They are convinced that Russia will back down, and if they don't back down, then Big Brother United States will come to their rescue. That is their belief, and they are willing to risk World War III because they are not willing to accept losing to Russia and terms in this conflict being dictated even 70% by Russia. They said it outright. We do not, Schultz said it, Starmer said it, we will not accept the demilitarization of Ukraine. To the contrary, we're going to pump Ukraine so full of theoretical future weapons that it will be the pillar of European security, i.e., it will be a de facto NATO battle platform for us into the future against Russia, and Russia will, of course, not accept that. The most cynical of the European people will be saying, we know Russia won't accept this. We want the war to continue because maybe some black swan event will happen, and maybe the 25,000th sanction will be the one that breaks the Russian economy's back and it will all be over, right? Something like that. Or ultimately the U.S. will get drawn in and then we'll defeat Russia and it will all be over. They cannot accept losing to Russia in Ukraine.
So given what happened, I'm sorry to interrupt. Given what happened, how do you think this turns out then? I mean, is this, okay, there is no peace deal. There won't be a peace deal. Zelensky
there was never going to be a peace deal. There was never going to be a peace deal.
It's solved on the battlefield.
Yes, it was always going to be solved on the battlefield. Because
I guess
The Russian terms could never be accepted by, not even by a U.S. president,
But
right?
see, Trump would
Not
have
even by
accepted those terms because Trump didn't care. The issue is Zelensky in Europe.
That's not necessarily true, because Trump was always making statements about arms for Ukraine, and he was making statements, we'll get most of Ukraine's land back for them, all of these things. You know, when Russia presented their arguments about Donetsk, Lugansk, Crimea, Kherson, Zaporozhye, demilitarization, denazification, denuclearization, all of that, right? There's no way that that could have all been accepted. And Russia, they've sacrificed too much to accept any less, right?
Yeah.
They've said it again and again, right? Putin would accept enormous political damage. It would be the end of Putin politically if when the Russian people saw victory and he backed down for some deal with Trump and half-arsed promises, right? And you know, handshakes, you know, which would be declared a Minsk III, right? In Russia, which is, you know, Russians won't accept that, right? They taste victory, right? They're and I believe that in the Kremlin, they ultimately see that we cannot coexist with this regime, right? We tried so many times, right, to come to a political settlement, and it's impossible. So the only way is to remove it root and branch, because if this ends and this regime isn't gone and NATO doubles down on, you know, its support of it, you know, whether it's, you know, officially in NATO or not, that's almost moot, then you know, our problems don't go away. In fact, they will only become worse, right? And for our national security and for the future of all the Ukrainians that aren't Banderites, right? We have to see this through to the end, because there is going ultimately to be no other peace in Ukraine or for us until this Banderite regime is rooted out of Kiev and probably as far as Lvov, root and branch.
So how far do you think they plan on going? This is take over the entirety of Ukraine. Is basically except guerrilla war.
Oh yeah, that was. Go back to my very first interviews on this conflict in 2022. Yeah. Right? In March, the first week of March, and I'm sitting next to some other you know, alt media people who speak about the military, right? You know, and in some bombastic terms, who lined up and said that it would all be over in 2 months. And they came to me and I said, it will be a forever war, right? Quote unquote, forever war. It is very unlikely that we will see real peace in Ukraine for the rest of our lives, right? Whether it's a frozen conflict, a guerrilla war, hot war, war with the West directly, it Humpty Dumpty has broken, you know, and all the hegemon's horses and all the hegemon's men can't put Ukraine back together again.
Do you think Trump is going to be able to normalize relations while the war goes on?
That will be hard, but he's successfully ignoring the Democrats and the press right now, right? Yeah. He now has the shield of saying that Zelensky and all of Europe gave him the big middle finger, right? So it won't be easy, right? But he has the capability, and he has at least shown part of the gumption to actually walk away from this. Now, I said just months ago on here that no U.S. president could walk away from it. And now I have reassessed. Trump could do that, right? Will he do that? That's the question. Look, as far as they were concerned, even this mineral deal was them implicitly making security guarantees to Ukraine, right? So they're, a lot of people think that Trump is somehow just wants to agree to all the Russian terms. No, Trump has his own unique sense of what U.S. national interests are, right? Some things I agree with, some things I don't, but he's not pro-multipolarism, people. He's not a good guy. There is no good guy, right? You can't elect Coke or Pepsi and elect Coke or instead of Pepsi or the like and all the world's problems. He is still the U.S. president. And if we have a U.S. retrenched Western Hemisphere empire instead of a U.S.-led Western hegemony in pursuit of primacy and hegemony, it might be better for Russia in the short term, right? In the consideration of the Ukraine conflict. But it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a better flavor of American empire for all the rest of us and all the world. He's still the leader of the U.S. And the problem is the U.S., right? I mean, sorry, Americans. I'm an ex-American, right? You're an American, but
I'm an American currently, yeah.
I mean, the U.S. has been this disruptive power on the world stage, for a long period of time, going back to the genocide of the Native Americans and slavery and everything else, and taking land, if not from the Indians, then from the Spanish and everyone else who took it from the Indians and Mexico and so forth, all the way to the Philippines, and now then post 45 becoming the superpower and then the global hegemon. The forms change, but the U.S. role in that, and until the U.S. is diminished, right, economically, resulting in military diminishment, you'll never have that. That's a brutal world of real politic, right? Of realism.
Mark, man, I always enjoy these conversations, man. I really do. Mark Sloboda, he's an international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSloboda1. You can check him out on his YouTube channel, Realpolitik or Mark Sloboda. And you can also find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. My man, thank you for this, Mark. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You too. Be safe. My man, I swear, man, Mark has been more right on this stuff than anybody else, which is why I always I give him special attention. I put it that way. He tends to nail it. And if you look back over the course of the last several years, he's been dead on over and over again, and an honest actor in the way that he's reported it, in the sense that his analysis lines up with reality. So shout out to Mark. Just to play another clip from that meeting to get across how bad and how much of a train wreck that meeting was. Here's Trump pointing out, I have empowered you to be this creature, this cretin, this troglodyte. I've allowed you to be this person. This is
the problem is
right here.
The problem is I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right.
That is a dressing down by the president of the United States, talking to Zelensky, who is, quote unquote, ungrateful for all of the money that was given. Zelensky was supposed to be there to sign the mineral deal. Zelensky wanted to relitigate the mineral deal in the middle of the press. And as you know by now, that did not go well. I want to bring in my guests. I am joined with the man himself, Andrei Telezhenko. He's a Ukrainian whistleblower and former diplomat. Andrei, man, welcome to the show. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Good morning, Jamal. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm watching the news as every time. Always these last couple of years, the developments are just going crazy, are blowing the regular orthodox standards of politics and international relations, and anything that is happening we thought in the world was normal today is going outwards throughout the door. So yes, that's what I.
It's fascinating. I've never seen anything that has been taking place over the last, let's say, month ever in my lifetime. And the meeting between Zelensky and Trump and Vance Friday just adds to it. Like, I mean, on some level, I get it, right? Like, you had the previous administration that said, we're with you for as long as it takes. You had Zelensky coming into congressional meetings, congressional applause, all of that stuff. Basically, they treated him as the belle of the ball. And he would go and he would say, I need $1 billion. They say, here's $1 billion. They say, here's $2 billion. He says, what do you mean? This is only $2 billion. I need $5 billion. And they give him $5 billion. I need F-16s. I need this gun. I need that gun. I need this missile. I need this missile. I need permission to fire missiles into Russia. And then Trump comes in. And as they point out, there's a new sheriff in town. No, no, no. And it's even reported in the Kiev Post, I believe. Well, I think it was the Washington Post, but Kiev Post also reported it, that Trump is now, after that meeting, talking about cutting all aid, or considering cutting all aid to Ukraine. Basically, you're a tough guy, be a tough guy on your own. Give me your overview of that meeting, because I'm super curious about what was going on in Ukraine as that meeting was taking place, meaning what was Ukrainians thinking as they saw Zelensky flip out in the White House in the Oval Office.
The problem Ukrainians have divided now. From what I speaking to the people on the ground, I know that a lot of them now are supporting Zelensky. They're trying to put this agenda back that we are backing the president. Even it doesn't make sense of Ukrainians supporting Zelensky. They're against Trump now because Trump was acting bad towards Ukraine, or is trying to cut aid to Ukraine, or talking bad to Zelensky. And at the same time, you have all these military police around the streets taking their men and sons off the streets into the front lines like dogs. And nobody's talking about that. Nobody's saying that Zelensky is bad. Now Trump is bad. So they're trying to change that narrative in Kiev and Ukraine. And half of the population, or some, are trying to back it up, but it's for a couple of weeks or days. It's not going to last long. Usually the euphoria is going to go away, and people will realize they are in deep shit. So what Ukraine really is in, and there's half of the population that understands and says, "Oh my God, what is happening? This has never happened," and Ukraine is done now just because of this clown in power who doesn't know how to deal and doesn't understand trash relations. So it's divided now. That's for sure. A lot of people are going against each other in Ukraine just because of this political game. And we're seeing all these pictures of soldiers throwing away American flags from their uniforms and on media and saying, "Oh, we're going against America." Well, they throw away all the helmets and all the ammunition and all the rifles that are American made, the artillery and Hummers and everything else. They should throw that out. That's American made. They should throw that out and say, "Oh, we're against America. We're going to fight with whatever we have." There's nothing left to have. There's nothing. Europe didn't give a lot. Whatever Europe gave, it's gone. So this is the reality, and they're going crazy there. The problem is too much pride. They lifted with the strategy with the USAID funds and NED funds and all those CIA groups that were laundering money to Ukraine. They did their job. They basically rose the pride of Ukrainians higher than anybody else, which is basically Nazism, saying that you are a priority nation and everybody owes to you. And that's what they did. And at the same time, they put them on the needle of dollars that Ukraine needs to be fed all the time because it's going to collapse. That's what Ukraine is today. It's a collapsing, failing nation without any foreign support. It's gonna die completely. It's already dead, but it's in life support. And unfortunately, this is what it is today. And for me, as Ukraine, watching what's happening in the Oval Office was just crazy, because even dictators and enemies don't talk to each other like this. Trump did the right thing. Trump actually pointed out to Zelensky, "Man, and Vice President Vance, the problem is Zelensky is not just a leader who came to the Oval Office as a neutral leader and talking. He's a so-called illegitimate president by the Constitution of Ukraine. At the same time, he is on totally life support from American dollars and funds and taxpayer money. So he has to not play a game as a neutral leader or independent guy. He has to actually obey. That's the biggest problem here. He doesn't understand. They're not at the same level. And Vance and Trump pointed that out to him, said, "Look, You have so much problems in Ukraine. You have no democracy. Your men are dying. You're trying to come to tell us what to do, and that flips Zelensky out. That flips Zelensky out because nobody tells him the truth to his face.
Yep.
Nobody, like Yermak, the Europeans, they're keeping him in a warm bath. They kept him in the warm bath for the last 4 years, saying that you're the true leader of the democratic world. You're the new Churchill, whatever, whatnot, all that crap, whatever they're trying to feed to everybody. They fed to him, and he actually believed in it. The problem is Zelensky. He doesn't understand foreign politics. He has a so-called law degree, but he never actually went to university, so he bought that law degree. He doesn't have a higher education. The guy is totally not in his place, trying to work international, very actually hard international relations and very strategic stuff, which he doesn't even completely has no understanding of. That's why Ukraine is failing. That's why he had some brains in his head. This war would never start, and that's what Trump pointed out to him, and he was right to do that. And I'm glad that he did it. And actually, I was applauding.
Yeah, it was an intervention, to put it mildly. I mean, let me see which clip. I played one clip before, basically saying he was disrespectful. Right here. Here's another one where Trump is talking about, because what's wild about it, the entire time Trump is like, dude, I'm trying to get a deal. I'm trying to get a ceasefire. You have no cards. And what Trump is trying to communicate to him is correct. You've lost the war. You are literally trying to pull kids, 18-year-olds, into the combat zone in order to fight. That's how bad things are. And just to make the point clear, Vance pointed out, you are dragging people and throwing them in the vans because you are in manpower shortages. And here's an example. I mean, I have a few of these. I've been watching these clips for months now. This is a mom trying to keep her kid from being dragged. And look at this. I mean, this has been taking place over all of Ukraine, by the way.
Every day, all over Ukraine.
On this one, the guy's walking his dog, and they snatch him from walking his dog. Can you imagine that? You go out to take your dog for a walk, and these goons grab you off the street, throw him into the van, and leave the dog. This is screaming. Like, this is, explain how this works. So how do they know who they're grabbing? Like, I'm walking my dog. Okay, how do they know who I am when I'm walking my dog to grab me and take me to the front lines?
They don't. They what is happening?
Arbitrary people.
Yeah, look how it works. These guys are with the support of the police. This is the so-called military police, the Tseka, they call them in Ukrainian, and they have no legal authority overall because there's no law for them. That's one thing. So these guys are illegal, but they are the Zelensky's army to keep everybody scared. Additional with the Secret Service of Ukraine that's having Nazi camps around and concentrated camps that are for people who want peace and killing journalists like Gonzalo Lira. And these are for the normal people who are not speaking out, but just out there. So there are men in Ukraine that have been living in their houses for 2 years in their apartments. Their moms come and bring them groceries because they cannot go out into the street because they're going to get taken to the front line.
Well,
these guys.
I want to nail this down. It's not like this is Bob Cobb and we have Bob Cobb on our list to get. This is okay.
No, this is random. Okay. This is a random. They see a guy saying, "Oh, he's the age between like 25 and 60, or even younger than that," and they go and get him. That's it. They don't care who it is. There's some men being taken off the streets with their children. The children are being left on the street alone, and they've been taken to the front to the military police headquarters. So this is what had happened. So what they're doing is they are with the support of the police. The police is backing them up. These guys are running around randomly around people's houses, apartment buildings, or in vans driving around. Or sometimes when I heard stories, there's people on the bus stop, men going to work in the morning because some people do need to go to work. They have no other choice. They cannot hide. They don't have the money or the funds or the family to support them. So some do go to work, and there's men on the bus stations, bus stops, and there's a regular bus stops by, and they think they're going to go to work, but no, they're out of that bus. The military police, where the police comes out and drags 20 men right into the bus, and they basically surround them. 20 people surround these 20 guys, and they just drag them in and go away. And these guys go sent to the front lines from 2 days up to 2 weeks. These guys do not get training. The training they have, they live in a field because there are no military headquarters or camps for them to live in. So basically, it's a field with tents, without no bathrooms, no showers. They're there from 2 days up to 2 weeks. They're not being fed properly. They don't even have cutlery kits or like nothing. They're just there cutting out plates from bottles and getting fed like whatever. But even in jail, they're being fed better. That's the footage I've been seeing from people who are there, and they then been sent to the front. They give them some uniform, a machine gun with the 30 bullets, and then they get sent to the front. That's it. That's what it is. And they die within a week because they don't have no training or nothing. And if they try to surrender to the Russian forces, they get shot in the back by the Azov battalion. So this is the reality in Ukraine. This is the so-called democracy. This is Zelensky sitting in the White House. He should not have not only been shouted at, they should have arrested him for crimes against humanity. That's what the White House and the state administration should have done. Not only for crimes against humanity, but also arrested him for the taxpayer money that he basically, the U.S. taxpayer money that he put into his pocket, and then investigate him. That's what they should have done.
That's going to be the extra interesting part, because now that they pissed Trump off, he's talking about investigations. People are screaming for investigations into where did the money go, because Zelensky pointed out, well, it's like $100 billion that we didn't get, and so Trump came out, hey, okay, if you didn't get $100 billion, we need to know where the money went, and that is going to be one of the most fascinating things. I want to play another clip for you though to get your take on. This is Trump talking about trying to make a deal. Zelensky being a petulant child.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to American people.
Except that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on out here. I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards.
Thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're
again,
running low on soldiers.
Listen,
you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I wanted this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire
with guarantees.
because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement. It's going to be a very hard thing to do.
That clip is fascinating because it's an intervention. Like he is. So in the reporting in the United States, in Time magazine, they pointed out that Zelensky was delusional. They call him messianic. They said he is out of touch with reality. And Trump is like, you are losing. Your people are dying. What is wrong with you? Why don't you want a ceasefire if you can get a ceasefire? Meaning, if we could stop the bullets from flying. By the way, Russia's not going to accept a ceasefire, but whatever. Trump is like, if you can stop it, you should stop it. With Trump's idea being, if we can stop the bullets, then we can maneuver from there with at the very least your people not dying. And he is like, nope.
This showed everybody's face.
Yeah.
Zelensky's face, the Europeans' face, who wants war and who wants peace. Yeah, maybe the Russians would not go for the ceasefire, but at least they are willing to sit down and start talking.
Right.
The same thing with negotiations. You have to compromise on your pride and sit down and start talking. That's what Zelensky came to power with, and he lied. And that's what he doesn't. He thinks he's being backed by globalists and by the European Union that will continue his war. Because for Zelensky, the stoppage of the war means his political or maybe physical death. Because everybody will understand what happened and what he did to the country, and he's done. So that's why he needs this war to continue, not only for his masters that want to make money on this, but for himself. So Trump's saying, and he said, look, you don't want to, he showed who Zelensky is, that he does not want peace because this is being happening behind closed doors all the time. Nobody saw this. Nobody understands who Zelensky, how he acts. I personally know, I've been talking to Prime Minister Fico's team, and I know that Zelensky was threatening to Prime Minister Fico for the last 2 years, or the last year and a half.
Threatening Fico?
Politically, not physically, but politically, that Ukraine is going to go against Slovakia, that Slovakia cannot do anything, that they're being backed by Washington, etc., etc. And this is how Zelensky talks to foreign leaders. Can you imagine how he's talking to Trump, the person and the president of the United States who's financing him, how he's talking to people who's not financing him or financing him, but in a much lesser proportions. Zelensky doesn't even care about those people. That's for a great example. And Trump showed Zelensky's face.
What is his motivation? Like, is it because there are several ideas that I have, and I want you, because you've met Zelensky, you know him better than I do. Is it he's just committed cognitively to the war? Is it he feels he was led down a path? Meaning at the point where the US and Europe is like, we're going to back you for as long as it takes. We're going to give you all the money. We're going to give you all the weapons. We're going to give you all this stuff. And from his point of view, it's like, okay, you guys told me you were going to back me. And now you're pulling this nonsense or pulling out of the war. Is it that he thinks he's going to be killed or imprisoned at the end of the war? Like, what do you think is the primary motivation for him to act this way?
Well, you have to understand, Zelensky doesn't think like he's like a president of a country. He's not a statesman. He doesn't think about the country or the people or anybody else around the globe. He thinks about himself. I know who he is. He is a bully, like by himself, how he acts. He's a drug addict, a bully, and that's what he is. He actually mentally a disabled person in a very bad way, not in the way of healthy, but in a broken way. That's what he is, and he was given the power to lead this war with the West. He was told that he's going to have the support of the West for this war in 2019. Right. He committed to this war to the Brits in 2019. That's his problem, and he understands that he's going to be killed or physically destroyed, politically destroyed, whatever, if this war ends. So that's why he needs to stay in power. That's why he doesn't want to have elections. Doesn't want to go away. He's standing his ground. He thinks that he's been backed by the globalists, by the Newlands and the Europeans. That they're going to continue to give him the money that he needs, but they cannot because Europe doesn't have the money. But he doesn't understand that he's being fed lies. He doesn't think about when people think. Even I've been talking to different people around the globe, and I've been telling one thing to everybody: you have to understand. This guy doesn't think as the president of a country, doesn't think about his people. If he did, this would have been over. That's why everybody's like trying to tell him, this war is bad, you're losing. Right. And he first of all, he doesn't understand. Second of all, he doesn't want to understand because he thinks only about himself. He said, what's in it for me? I want to stay in power. I was told that I'm going to come out a hero. I'm going to live as a hero. I'm going to have all the money that I got. Nobody's going to try to investigate me because I'm a hero and I broke down Russia. No, he didn't break down Russia. He failed to keep Ukraine safe. It was his obligation not to have to start this war. It was his obligation as a country that doesn't have a nuclear capability to sit down on a table with a country that has nuclear capability. And first and second of all, the country that we were part of for more than 350 years. Yeah, 350 years. We were part of Russia, Russian Federation, the Soviet Union. We were one nation. We were much closer than the Belarusians are with the Russians and anybody else from the Soviet Union. We have families on both sides, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters living on both sides of the border. So this is what Ukraine is. They should have sit down and talk. Russia was open to sit down and talk. Said, give us just the promise Ukraine's not going to join NATO and we're not going to do anything. But no, everybody said Ukraine's going to join NATO. They put it in the constitution. Zelensky, the chief of the military armed forces in 2021, before the war, he said, I'm going to drive a tank throughout Moscow. What is this? Who are these people? They're warmongers. They wanted this war. They were provoking this war to make money for themselves and for their owners. Zelensky was promised a political career. Zelensky was promised a political career and billions of dollars. He's a billionaire. He maybe got more money than Trump has, but Trump got them legally, and his family is owning business legally. On the other hand, we have a dictator who's a billionaire. That's why he's acting this way, because he is a bully, and he's thinking about not that his country needs sound. That's what people need to understand what they mean in Zelensky. He's not a statesman.
Arestovich pointed out that Zelensky was going to be prosecuted at the end of this war. Do you think that's true? That once this war ends, and again, I got to be honest, I don't know what Ukraine is going to look like at the end of this war. Mark Sloboda, because Trump went with this idea that I'm going to get a deal, I'm going to get a deal. It doesn't seem like Zelensky wants a deal, nor does it seem like Europe wants a deal. If the U.S. pulls its resources away, then Ukraine is going to collapse. And there's a question of how far does Russia go? Are they going to go to the Polish border? If so, then Ukraine is non-existent or it's something else. If, though, by chance, there's some kind of deal, will the next leader, the legitimate leader of Ukraine, prosecute Zelensky in the way that Zelensky has been going after his political opponents?
We have to understand Ukraine and what Ukraine is part of. It was historically part of the Slavic Russian world. There's the Anglo-Saxon world and there's the Slavic Russian world. Nobody's going to that Anglo-Saxon world trying to get Ottawa to join China or Russia or whatever. That's nonsense. The same thing here. The United States needs to pull out of Ukraine. If Trump also wants to move forward fast, and after what he saw, and hopefully understands what Zelensky is now, and show to the world, it's not just about what if America is going to pull out, Ukraine is going to fail. No, if America is going to pull out, and we're going to have a neutral government in power in Ukraine that will lead throughout these negotiations with Russia and Washington, saying that putting a neutral government that will have no intelligence agencies of the United States in Ukraine or foreign intelligence agencies, have a new embassy, reformed U.S. embassy with the new Trump administration there and other embassies. That's it. That's the only legal grounds. Basically, have some sovereignty give some sovereignty for Ukraine, and the neutral government will make a peace deal on its own with Russia, or it will keep Ukraine fully intact as whatever is left of it, and lead it as a neutral country. That will be also a gain for everybody. Or Ukraine will choose to join Russia, probably it won't, or it will choose to join physically with Russia, become some part of Russia, and that will be also to the neutral government to decide. But anyway, it will be peace. But most important part, I think Ukraine will stay as a neutral country. Russia will want to have a country neutral by its border. They don't want to invade or take over fully Ukraine. They need a country that will be helpful for them, not only by their side on the borderline, but also be helpful for them in foreign organizations like UN, other OSCE, etc. So you'll have their voice and support, and you'll have a neutral government that will work together with Moscow. That's what I think it's going to lead to. That's what Trump needs to understand. They need to pull out of Ukraine. America is not gaining anything from this. This is just getting into total chaos. Zelensky doesn't have a voice. You pull out, you close down Starlink, it's over. You pull out your foreign CIA groups and other NSA and all the 60 intel agencies that the United States have out of Ukraine. And New York Times showed that they were part of this war. They're the ones who were preparing the Ukrainian Nazi battalions, and they were fighting this war at the beginning when Russia went into Ukraine in the beginning. The CIA was part of this, and they still are. They're giving intel, maps, and satellite pictures to the Kiev regime today. Stop that. Agree on a neutral government, and you will have peace. I will tell you, and I will try to make everything from my end possible to make peace. I don't know where I'll be, but I will do whatever I can. And as soon as Ukraine at least gets some sovereignty for a couple of months, you will see this will be over. Zelensky will be over. He may be prosecuted, and I think he should be prosecuted for the crimes he did in Ukraine. He killed 3 of my friends were shot by the Secret Service of Ukraine, and more than 1,000 people were imprisoned. More than thousands of people were in prison, and by the United Nations, it's over 15,000 political cases. Women are living in prisons, men are living in prisons for just believing in peace or wanting to be with Russia, because Ukraine was part of Russia historically. It's not like Russia came into London and said, told everybody to be part of Russia. No, We were historically there. That's why we have so many ties. That's why people did support Russia, wanted peace with Russia. It's not like Russia had propaganda there. It was Western propaganda of hatred toward Russia. That is the problem. Get that out. Trump needs to get that out. As what he did with the United States, get out of Ukraine, and you'll have peace, and he'll have full responsibility for that peace because he was the one who actually got U.S. out of Ukraine, and that will be helpful for us.
To back you up on this, when Trump killed USAID, we uncovered all sorts of intelligence operations all around the globe that USAID was effectively working on in Romania and Georgia and Hungary, and also Ukraine, where 9 out of 10 media organizations were paid for by us.
90%, 90% of the media was owned by the American taxpayer money.
And it's like, what do you think those media organizations were saying? They obviously weren't pro-Russian. They were whipping up a fervor in a particular direction. I know this is painful for you, but why were your friends killed? What was the circumstances around their murders?
I can tell you that they were not political figures. They were not members of parliament. They were not they were just regular people, political experts, going on television talking about peace for Ukraine. And one of them, I don't want to name his name publicly, but he got shot. But I can name it in any authorities that if they have questions. He got shot by the security service of Ukraine in front of his family. His child is disabled in a wheelchair, and he got shot right in front of his family. When he opened the door to them, they shot him in his head. And that's it. So
and they did that because they were giving political analysis, not wanting war, not necessarily.
Yes. He was just wanting peace. He said, we should not fight with Russia. We should not have war. It's going to destroy Ukraine. That's what I've been talking about. They were actually also after me. I was put on a kill list in Ukraine. I was sanctioned by the Ukrainian government. I was sanctioned by the US first for going against the Biden administration and by Pompeo and his henchmen, and falsely. And then I got sanctioned in Ukraine. Then I was put on a kill list in Ukraine for speaking about peace. For the last 4 or 5 years, I said Ukraine should get away from foreign influence. Ukraine is going to be led to become a battlefield. I was saying this in 2018-19. Ukraine is going to become a battlefield if we continue this politics, and that's what Ukraine is. And I was followed. I had to flee Ukraine not because of the war. I had to flee Ukraine because my own government wanted to kill me for coming out and saying I want peace. I'm not connected to any agencies or Russians or Europeans or whatever. I was just by myself talking about this everywhere. So was my friends. And now they cannot because they were shot. Unfortunately, they were very unfortunate because I told everybody they had to flee. But because I was more fortunate, I don't know why, but I could get out. The problem is this is what Ukraine has become, a total dictatorship, like Gonzalo Lira. He was talking about the truth in Ukraine, and he got killed
in Ukraine.
He was an American citizen. Yeah. Can you imagine what they're doing to Ukrainians?
Yeah.
If he had an American passport, what happened to him? Can you imagine what's happened to Ukrainians?
And if
they're being tortured. I had friends who were tortured. They were
put out. Biden didn't care. And Joe Biden didn't care
because they were backing this. Because they were the ones backing this. They were financing this through USAID. They were financing all this nonsense in Ukraine. They were financing the Azov battalion. They were financing all these Nazis in Ukraine. That's why Zelensky needs to also take responsibility for this. And hopefully Biden and his administration will be also put accountable for what they did, for what where the money went. Because a lot of money did not only settle down in Zelensky's pocket. More than 70% of that money that was lost was settled down in pockets of US citizens. Basically, they stole from their own people. And one of the countries that was used for stealing this money was the United Arab Emirates. Let America investigate United Arab Emirates, follow the dollars through that country. That will be interesting to find out what happened next, because a lot of Zelensky's henchmen are getting financed and money laundered through the United Arab Emirates. And it's not in the news, this information. I'm just telling what I know from the inside. And a lot of Americans that were supporting this war, Vindman, all these crowds were being financed and laundered to those countries in the Middle East also. So I'm not saying those countries are bad or responsible. It's just that they used them. Maybe not. They did not even know why they were being used, but they were being used in a way to launder the blood money from Ukraine.
What I was looking for was Okay, right here. So it was a report. I remember when it came out. It said 70% of the weapons to Ukraine were missing, like they didn't know where they were. And the Biden administration admitted that they were not tracking the money and the weapons as they were going to Ukraine. It was like they were throwing money and weapons out of helicopters. Tucker Carlson recently pointed out that many of these weapons were being put on the black market, was being sold either in Syria, in Gaza, in Mexico, like the drug cartels, for I think he said 20 cents on the dollar. So if the weapon costs $100, they only pay in $20 for it, 20 cents on the dollar. Oh, is that true? Is that something that you're aware of, just based on your contacts inside Ukraine and the way money and weapons have been flowing into the country?
Everything is being sold out. Everything. If you can sell out a person's life, you're going to sell out bullets and weapons, and that's what they did. And they were not just selling them to Syria and to drug cartels. They were even selling them to the Russians, offering them on getting offers through the military intelligence of Ukraine and the Secret Service of Ukraine. That's how bad it was. And I can tell you that I know that from a fact that they were doing this. And people were responsible for all that nonsense being happening in Ukraine with the Democratic Party. Like I said, Vindman was one of the persons who was allegedly giving Ukraine help through Poland, but he was responsible for overseeing the weapon transfers in Ukraine also. And I know that for a fact. And also, those weapons were being, I said, overseen by the military intelligence of Ukraine, together with the United States government, for selling those weapons on the side. That's what they were making money on. Not just laundering money, but making money on selling those weapons. And I can tell you that those weapons that were being sold out and the weapons that were so-called coming into Ukraine, they don't even match, because officially the warehouses were supposed to be full. The warehouses, this war was also to clean up the house. It was done especially for this, because they were cleaning up the warehouses, because a lot of those weapons under U.S. government and former administrations were being sold off on the side, and that's why they needed this war to give away so-called Ukraine weapons by the list. One thing, officially they were giving them something else, and half of that something else was being sold out to the third market. So this is what the reality was. Everybody was making money while Ukrainians and Russians were splitting blood. How bad you can get. And you're still coming out, and all these Europeans and Zelensky, and Zelensky knows everything about this. That's why I don't believe they're going to keep him alive in the West. That's why he understands this. That's why he needs to continue to fight, because that's his life. That's his life support for him. Because he knows too much. He was involved too much in this, and all his crowd around him. So this is how bad it is. And this is what Trump needs to understand and investigate. And I think he understands this, how bad this system got, that this war is not just about a war of national security. This war is about money, cleaning out cleaning out the warehouses, saying that what we had before, not to show that we were selling off these weapons before even the war. And this is from the American side. So this is how bad it is. And unfortunately, Ukraine was lured into this. Nobody listened to people like me who were talking. I was talking about this. I said for years and years and years that this should never happen. Ukraine should become sovereign and independent. Unfortunately, the coup was made for U.S. money. I was there in Maidan. I saw that money also coming in from the U.S. government. Trucks with the U.S. diplomatic plates coming in and giving away pallets with dollars and hryvnias and whatever. And there was this room stack of money in the trade unions building in the downtown area of Kiev. And that's for a fact. And that's what U.S. was backing up this whole coup. That's what U.S. told Ukraine not to touch Crimea. It was basically to get Russians involved in this deeply. And with Crimea, it was good when the Americans told us not to at least shoot, because we did not lose anybody there. It was a peaceful transition. Yeah, we lost Crimea. The people voted there to become part of Russia, but Ukraine didn't spill blood. Nobody died, thank God, in that situation. And that's what they lured them in with a shiny coin. And then that's what they wanted, to get Russia involved in this with Ukraine. So Ukrainians would hate Russia. They rose their pride, the hatred. It was all psychological warfare. And Ukrainians and the West was involved in this. That's why the people in the West so much listen to CNN and believe that crap, because it was psychological warfare. By the money of the USAID and NED, Newland, and all the people that are Russophobes and hate Russia, and they think they're still living in the Cold War era.
Just to nail this down, you said you were there when they were bringing in pallets of money, and they were using that money and effectively to pay off the various actors on the ground in order to push the overthrow.
It was paying out for the buses, for the stage, for the fuel for the stage. Everything had to be for the groceries. Yeah, people were bringing out money on the side. That money was given away to people to pay off for their work. I personally got paid for being part of Maidan by actors of Maidan.
Wow.
And that I can also testify to. I didn't talk about this before because it was too much on my plate with the Bidens involved and everything else. But people know that I was there and I can talk about this. I was there meeting with Newland. I was there coordinating all the international work with Pyatt. And I know how it all happened. So unfortunately, that money, there was a huge room. Not a huge room, but like a room like 40 square meters, stacked with cash right to the top. And the cash was being taken away and given away when we're needed to pay off different actors and for the stage and for the buses to bring in people to transfer them there. So everything, it was not just a gathering of people to fight democracy. It was a payout, an organized crime situation to overthrow a legitimate president at that time who did make a lot of mistakes. And that's why people actually didn't want to, that's why I didn't want to support Yanukovych at that time. But now I believe if he stayed, we would have a war. And I'm going to be praying with my wife all my life for what I did, because it was a big mistake being part of that coup. I believe I just came back from the West, living there for more than 10 years, and I thought I'm going to be doing something good for Ukraine. But when I saw what was happening after the coup, because I was part of the government, I came out and started my fight for the truth in 2017. And since then, I'm still fighting and people are trying to destroy me, but I'm going to still tell the truth.
No, I understand. I mean, I understand the regret associated with being part of effectively a coup that led to this just chaos. Well, this is almost, I guess, like penance, this attempt to try to make up for it. No, I do get the dynamic. What was your communication with Victoria Nuland like? I mean, she looks like a pit bull. She's seems a repugnant human being. What was your feeling from her? What was your communications with her like, if you can go into it?
Yeah, we had a meeting in December of 2013 in the Hyatt in Kiev. It was Ambassador Pyatt, Yatsenyuk was there, Klitschko was there, Technibok, Ambassador Shamshur, and I. The U.S. Embassy asked me to arrange all those so-called leaders of the opposition to meet Nuland there. I arranged them to come, and we had a meeting, and there was a luncheon, but we didn't eat. For everybody, and she actually came in and started swearing in Yanukovych. Like she swears like like a sailor. She's very aggressively.
She looks like it.
She hates everybody. She hates, but she loves herself very much, as most of people. But she loves herself so much that she doesn't care about anybody else, and she's ready to destroy the country from within. And so basically, she was swearing in Yanukovych that he didn't want to pick up the phone from her. But who was she? She was deputy assistant to the head of the Secretary of State, and he was the president of the country. So he doesn't have to pick up a phone from her. She's nobody to him on a level. So basically, she was very aggressive towards Yanukovych, and she was thinking about how to gather more people, how to push more aggressive moves against the acting president at that time, Yanukovych, what to do for the opposition at that time.
Wait. She said she was meeting with Yanukovych and working against Yanukovych.
Yes, she was talking to him over the phone, trying to convince him not to act aggressively against the crowd on Maidan. But at the same time, she was talking to the opposition, face to face, also saying that she should act more aggressively towards him. So they were playing this bad good cop situation and trying to put like the pressure on Yanukovych from the crowd, saying, "No, but we were never involved."
Don't respond to the massive crowd that is trying to overthrow your government, and then go to the massive crowd and say, "We need to overthrow this government." Yes,
that's what basically was happening. And she was saying, and I remember the fact when she said, "I want to come on Maidan and give out bread from the stage," and that's what the cookie part happened. I told her it's a bad idea because bread and Jesus. You're not Jesus, thank God. And plus, it's not hygiene there to give out bread from your feet like to the people. So we're not in the Roman times. So whether something packed or hygienic, and then Ambassador Pike confirmed they supported it and said, "Oh yeah, that's what the cookie part came out." So this is what happened during that meeting in December. Very aggressive woman. I never saw a woman swear so much in my life. Even people on the streets, when you talk to, they're more intelligent than you. And she's a very Russophobic woman. I don't know what happened to her on the Russian ship that she was in the 90s, but she hates Russia very badly. Not even in a good way, but she hates Russia. Not even thinking about it. She just, with all her force and body, she understands that she can make money on this. And that's what I think why she's doing
I read
this.
her memoir. Apparently, a Russian peed on her when she was 6 years old, and she never forgave him.
Oh, okay, there you go. We have World War III.
Totally joking. I'm sorry. I don't know if that's true.
I thought you were saying the truth because I would have believed it if somebody ever said something. Wow. Now we have World War III because somebody in her 6 years old did something to that. But I'm saying, but she's very undiplomatic, and she's smart, but she's very undiplomatic. She's very aggressive, and she's very she hates everybody I think around her. Only she loves herself and her husband, who's making money and made money on the coup in Ukraine.
Did you meet her again before the coup took place in February?
No, I met her only in December, and I wasn't part of the security decoy with Senator McCain came. I was involved in his coming to Kiev also, and Chris Murphy, who went against me in 2020, saying that good that they sanctioned me, even though I was there when he was on the stage. So everything, all these crowd, they don't believe what they're saying. They don't believe in Ukraine. They're only using Ukraine, and I think they even hate Ukraine. They know that Ukraine's going to lose, but they say, why not use them? They're idiots. Their government sold off. Why not use them? So that's why they hate also Russia so much, because and Belarus, because they're independent and sovereign, didn't break under their rule or didn't break under their authority. And the same as Georgia. Georgia didn't break under them and say, we will not fight Russia. We will not be anti-Russia. And they basically, at one point did it, but now I'm saying not. Now, I'm saying about right now what has happened. At one point with Saakashvili, yes, but now Georgia said no. So this is what we have today. Ukraine totally collapsed. All these guys are not going to pay a price for all what they did. Everybody is trying to become anti-Russia or trying to go this way in Europe now and build a force to undermine Trump's peace negotiations with Putin. And this is the reality. And we were talking about this for months and months and months. And I said this before to you in couple and other shows that Zelensky and the Europeans are trying to undermine Trump and his peace talks with President Putin and try to continue this war. And this is what's happening today because the globalists have no other choice to continue this war to make more money and to cover up their crimes.
What do you think when you see liberals, either in Europe or the United States, claim we care about Ukraine, we love Ukraine, but we have to support Ukraine to the last dead Ukrainian? Like, how does that make you feel when you see these people claim not necessarily ownership, but claim as if they are backing Ukrainian interests while watching it be fundamentally destroyed? Like, it's so unrealistic. It's so bizarre.
They're hypocrites. They're hypocrites because whatever they're saying is destroying Ukraine more and more. Yeah. They could have stopped this. Johnson could have not come into Kiev and continued, and we would have peace negotiations in Istanbul. There's blood on his hands, and there's blood on all those liberals' hands who want to continue this war. Because first of all, how can you fight a nuclear country and win? You cannot. That's basically just, you have to understand that. They believe in their own lies that Russian army is bad, or it's corrupt, or it's destroyed, or it's still in the post-World War II era that they're going in and with old tanks and the Soviet Union, but no, it's one of the strongest armies now. And actually, it upgraded itself within the last 2 years of this war and is now much more powerful than any army in the world, having the experience of the war of the 21st century. Hand-in-hand combat on the ground. So their army is much, much stronger. And the liberals believe in their own lies that they can win Russia. They failed to destroy Russia and break it apart in the first 3 months of the war. And they have to understand that's why they're so angry. And they continue this war to make money on this, and so people in Europe and over the globe will not take them out of power because as people start understanding that this war was for nothing. And it's not Afghanistan or even the Middle East where people are dying and it's a great, great tragedy. But this is a war between a nuclear nation, the largest gas and oil reserve country in the world, $75 trillion worth of resources reserved in this country, and has a future more than anybody else in Europe and the West. And they understand that this is a country you cannot fight with. So at the same time, they believe in their lies that they can break it apart. And that is the biggest problem. When you start believing in your own lies, you start to fail and you start to lose. And this is what the West, the liberals, are losing right now. That's why they lost in America, thank God. With these elections and Trump came back to power, maybe he's going to make some common sense back to the world. And hopefully he will understand that this second term, that he will have to do everything he can to make peace. And it's going to be one of maybe the hardest challenges in his life to do this. But he will prevail if he understands what is against him and what is the deep state against him doing in Ukraine, that he has to get them out and not let them undermine him. And the Europeans, I think within the next 5 years, will also change and have conservative government because the liberal government failed their own people, and Europe is now falling apart because of their so-called liberal ideas and agenda to continue this war in Ukraine because they believe in their own lies. And Europe is now in total destruction. Zero growth economics in France, zero growth economics in Germany. The leaders there are fully controlled by the globalists, and that's where we are today. The gas that they're buying from the U.S. is 3 times more expensive.
Yeah.
And as I said, now the main idea is U.S. and Russia needs to sit down on a table, make a good work for them between themselves. I've been talking about the Arctic for the last 3-4 years. That's a thing that they will hopefully agree on and work together. Latin America, they will agree and work together. I think that's Russia's ready to compromise. The problem is the warmongers don't want to compromise because they have no other choice because they're fighting for their lives now.
And they've cognitively committed to this war. I mean, like it's astonishing to me to watch these guys in a room by themselves talk about all of the things that they're going to do, even though they had no power to do it. It's bizarre. There's something that you said. You said you were told not to touch Crimea. Who told you not to touch Crimea?
The U.S. government at the time. The Pentagon
in the U.S. government.
I was already an advisor to the first deputy prime minister of Ukraine, overseeing law enforcement and Ukrainian intel. And we were talking to the deputy head of the Pentagon, the director of CIA, Brennan, and national security advisors within the White House, and also the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, Zentas, all that crowd. We were talking to different delegations, and they gave an order to the acting so-called president at the time, Turchinov, not to fire in Crimea. And they basically tried to tell us that the green men in Crimea were now Russian military, to give them more evidence that they're Russian military, even though the U.S. knew that was happening. I was in contact with the White House in February 2014, there was a delegation from the Ukrainian diaspora. They called me from Biden's office and said Ukrainians going to lose Crimea, and this was February 20th of 2014. And I didn't believe it at the time. The Americans knew, and they told us not to get involved. So they tried to lure this in to get Russia involved, and they used this situation to try to make the civil war between Russia and Ukraine, and in Donbass, the civil war between Russians and Ukrainians, and to build up the hatred towards Russia, that Russia took something from Ukraine away, even without any bullets fired.
Wait,
no bullets
how did they
fired.
know? I'm sorry to interrupt. How did they know that Russia was going to take Crimea?
It was. We have to understand that Crimea was always a sacred place for the Russian fleet.
Oh no,
And
I
there
get
was.
that. I'm just saying, how did America know in advance that Russia was going to take it?
I think you should ask the Americans this. They were. I just got a phone call from Biden's office from the diaspora that was there talking to him during the coup in Ukraine, And that's what they were told. So I don't know who knew. I think the intel was working. The U.S. intel also works. One of the strongest intel groups is the Americans and the Russians and the Chinese now, I think. So they are doing their job. So they know what's happening. And so they understood that this is going to be the next phase that Russia's going to do. They're going to try to protect their people there, because there's a lot of what happened is, within the last 30 years, Ukraine did nothing to invest in Crimea or in Eastern Europe or Eastern Ukraine. Ukraine elites and government in Crimea actually put it into a total almost destruction. There was no roads. The Crimea was falling apart. The hotels there, the government-owned hotels, were falling apart. You cannot have lived there. Like, basically, it's all was total destruction. No investments. A lot of people holding Russian passports in that territory, and a lot of people, more than 90%, they're saying that they are Russian. And so this was the situation that Ukraine was becoming into. So Ukraine lost Crimea because they didn't do anything within their 30 years of independence to keep Crimea part of Ukraine. If they could have invested into politics, invested into political strategy there, invested into show that Ukraine is good, invested into roads, infrastructure, maybe people wouldn't want to leave. But Ukraine didn't do anything. The same thing with Donbass. Ukraine only used Donbass to feed itself with the coal and the mineral reserves there and the gas to feed Ukraine. They didn't invest anything. Like in Donbass and Donetsk, the sewer pipe system was never updated from 1970s. And when Ukraine became independent, they didn't know the roads were terrible, total destruction. The oligarchs were just feeding from Donbass. Nothing was done. And people saw it. People living there said, oh, so Ukraine is going to tell us what to do, which language to speak. What did they do within the 30 years of independence to make it better for us to live? We have no roads, no gas, nothing. We're basically have no sewage system, which is working, no water. Like there was water, but there was problems with it time to time. In a big city like Donetsk, million people living there. People think, why do we have to support this? And they're telling us what to do, and we have to support the coup. No. So people basically said, we don't want to be part of this. We see that the Russian people are living better than us. Ukraine was one of the poorest countries. Belarus had a better life style than in Ukraine and better GDP. Russia, much better GDP. People are citing this and say, all these post-Soviet countries are living better than us. Why do we have to be going to Europe if we can live a life with our own people? And Ukraine never did anything to invest in us, and we're going to go this way. So it was Ukraine's fault for not supporting its own people. The last 30, they had a chance, they didn't, and this is why this war started. This is why the civil war started, because the Ukrainian military started to shell Ukrainians in the east because they wanted to protest. But at the same time, in Kiev, if a police officer would hit a protester who threw a rock at him with a stick, he's going to go to jail or shot, or he has to go and face the Hague court, etc. That's crazy. But at the same time, when people came out there in eastern Ukraine to say we don't want to be Ukrainianized, we want to speak Russian, they were shelled with artillery by the order of the director of CIA, Brennan. This is what the reality is today. And nobody talked about it. The West kept quiet because this is the agenda. The West needed this war to start. And that's what Trump understands this. And Vance understands this.
That story was buried. Like, meaning that wasn't something that they talked about, even when they talk about it today. It gets buried in Western media. It's astonishing the way they were able to basically silence all of this. Andre, man, thank you for this. Very informative today. And I can imagine that we have a fantastic crowd here where, we hit like 700. It is fascinating because a lot of what you're saying is from personal experience. And so when you're explaining it from, I met this person. I was there when this happens. That's extraordinarily informative. And I really do appreciate it. Andrei Telizhenko, he's a Ukrainian whistleblower and former diplomat and a really good friend of the show. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamaro. Thank you, everybody. All the best, and God bless you.
You too. Be safe. Have a good one. Fantastic guest. Fantastic guest. Nothing else to say. Fantastic guest. The notion that he was there with that bulldog of a woman, Victoria Nuland, it sounds like her personality is exactly what you would think her personality is. A repugnant degenerate that has no issue, just a full sociopath in the way that she engages. She's out there handing out cookies with bad breath and effectively aging them on into a war. It's astonishing. Shout out to him. I really appreciate Andre on that one. To keep this boat rocking, I am going to go to my next guest in a very short moment. We're joined. There we are. We are joined. Good friend of the show, Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin is a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In his book, Custom Reality and You, he explores a world where profit is the driving force. He also has the other book, Woke. Check him out.
Ouroboros. It's a tough word, and I do understand.
So what's the word again? Oh.
It's Ouroboros. It's a snake eating its own tail.
Ouroboros. Just, yeah. How you doing, man?
It's not a common word, but I have noticed more people using it.
Well, that's because you use it for the book. And so like, have you ever noticed, it's like, that's a nice red car. Oh my God, look at all these red cars. It becomes that, right? It's like the moment that you hear the word used once, you hear it all the time. How you doing, Peter?
No, there's actually a word for that, but I don't remember what it is right now.
Oh, right. That sense of seeing those things over and over again.
Yeah.
How you doing? You doing okay?
I'm good. How about yourself, Jamal?
I am doing good. I my lifeblood is news. And so when something happens, it's super interesting. When nothing happens, it's pulling teeth. And so the fact of Trump and Zelensky flipping out, it writes itself. It just writes itself.
No.
Like the moment that I saw it, I was like, okay, I need a Ukrainian, I need Mark, and we're gonna go from there. And let both just go. Because it's astonishing. Like this changeover from Joe Biden, where anytime Zelensky farted, Joe Biden was there to sniff it. And to Trump, where he's like, just hates him. Like you can tell he just dislikes him. From in the meeting, he's just sitting there just despondent. It's like, God, I have to talk to this guy. And apparently the reporting was that Donald Trump was trying to cancel the meeting. Zelensky was pissed off because he wasn't getting what he wanted with the deal. Because what Zelensky wanted was security guarantees. And Trump is like, no, I'm not getting America involved in a war. Are you out of your mind? And Europe, effectively, Boris Johnson was like, look, just take the deal. Meaning even if you don't get security guarantees, the United States has a vested interest if indeed it's getting 50% of everything that comes out of the land. And they keep calling it a mineral deal. And I'm like, this is not a mineral deal. It was oil, gas, hydrocarbons, minerals, rare earth minerals, and then it had any other extracted product for the foreseeable future. I didn't even see a time scale on it. It was just, we will own 50% of Ukraine. Now, there's a bit of diciness in that, just because, for one, Ukraine signed a 100-year security guarantee deal with the UK, which is fascinating to me because the UK came here begging Donald Trump to fight in Ukraine. So it's like, wait a minute. So you got a loan on a loan, or you got insurance policy on insurance policy? Like, like the bank gets an insurance policy, and then that bank gets another insurance policy. And it's like, okay, dude,
and then they make a derivative based on if that insurance policy is triggered, and you can buy that.
But it's like when Keir Starmer was asked directly by Donald Trump, which is, I love the scene, because Trump turns to Starmer and said, well, hey, you can fight the Russians on your own, right? And everybody in the room laughs. Everybody in the room laughs. It's just outrageous to me. I have feelings about this war. And I know a lot of people believe, well, Jamal feels this way because he worked at Sputnik and he wants to get his job back. Dude, I mean, that's the most.
Those are two separate issues, in my opinion.
They're not exactly separate, but that's not my motivation. My motivation is, oh my God, all of these people are dying. And the shock of it. Like, I was at this, I would tell you, I was naive. I'm talking too much, Peter. I'm sorry.
No,
I was naive. When I started working at the station, we started talking about Nord Stream. And I remember I kept thinking to myself, why are we talking about this fucking pipeline? Like, why is this pipeline so important? And then the war starts. And nobody at the station believed Russia was going to go in. And I started thinking to myself, why did I get that wrong? And why is all of these Americans getting it wrong? And what I realized was it's because we're Americans. We don't have an enemy at our gate. We don't have we haven't been invaded all of these times in the way that Russia has. It's a different mindset. And when I started to tilt my mindset, this stuff started to make more sense. But I got to be honest, I was shocked by the whole thing. This is a catastrophe. Hundreds of thousands of people are losing their lives. And I can't wrap my head around it. I can't understand why. Like, I understand the mechanics, but even understanding the mechanics doesn't change the fact that we pushed a country into a conflict that got 1 million people killed and untold numbers of people maimed, destroyed, etc. I can't wrap my head around that. I can't countenance that. Even if I don't get my job back, that's secondary to the point that this is a war that needs to stop. I just can't fathom
It's
it.
nuts. It's honestly insane. And the thing, I think you made the right point in that we're Americans, and it's hard for us to wrap our heads around this. And to some extent, you either have to like be put in a position like you said, got a job with an organization, more or less put different information in front of your face, and that changes your perspective a little bit. Or you have to start paying attention to news sources that are completely different. You have to start essentially just taking whatever the state says as a lie. Like, you have to have a reason for that. Something has to tell you, like, oh, we're being told the wrong thing by the state about what's going on there. Like, people are just dying for no good reason. Well, for the reason that they want to be. They have been after Russia the entire time. Like, it's not that it changed over from the Soviet Union collapsed, and the whole thing was they wanted to balkanize the country, and they wanted a bunch of small capitalist nations and that they can easily control through alliances and economic pressure. It's just, it didn't happen, and that's what they've always wanted to happen. They still want it to happen, and that's ultimately like the problem is they don't like, that's what this whole Ukraine thing is. It was about expanding NATO. It was about bringing that closer to Russia. And the reason they were bombing the Donbass, I mean, it's all essentially tied to that very, very old goal that I'm not even completely sure everybody who is involved with fully understands, because a lot of them were not alive at the time when that goal, like, the NATO started after World War II, shortly after World War II, and that that's really why they're like, NATO as its original implementation is why all of this stuff is happening. And it's just astounding, because so many people are probably not even thinking about it from that perspective who are involved with this. They're probably not thinking about the idea that this is ultimately about, and this is why so many people think that the war started in 2022 rather than in 2014. Or you could argue much sooner.
You know what's wild about that? When I had Europe is in a fantasy land. And I think the same thing with me when I was looking at this at first, I think it's affected Europe also, where they're so accustomed to Europe as a garden and all of this other stuff that they don't fully accept the gravity that they could start a third world war. And this is wild, considering the fact that Europe started 2 other world wars. And it's still pushing in this direction. I was talking to my ex.
It's true.
It's true. I was talking to my ex. She's from Austria, and she is on this European fantasy land thing. And it was pissing me off so much on the phone, right? Because I'm like, you are in a fantasy. What you want is secondary to the fact that you lost the war. How are you? And then I got brutal, right? I'm like, you started. When I'm going with you, I'm in brutal mode. You started 2 world wars. How are you pissing on the tree trying to start another one? It's wild. I'm sorry. I want to go. One of the fascinating things was how fast Lindsey Graham dropped Zelensky. Lindsey Graham was the guy who was telling Trump, there's so many rare earth minerals there, Trump. We can't leave it to the Russians. All right, Lindsey Graham went on Fox News, and I want to get your take on this. I love this. Lindsey Graham said this. And by the way, Lindsey Graham is a warmonger, just so everybody knows. In case you were unclear, he is a John McCain warmonger who was full-throatedly backing the Ukraine project. In fact, he was even one of those people who said, look, what's the issue? All these people are dying. Yeah, but they're not Americans. And the money is coming back to us in weapons. So, the world is great. Listen how fast this has changed since that meeting with Zelensky, Vance, and Trump.
I met with Zelensky this morning. I urged him to stay on message, be grateful, be thankful. We'll talk about details of security guarantees later. Keep it upbeat, keep it positive. It was absolute, utter disaster. The question for me is he redeemable in the eyes of Americans? Most Americans witnessing what they saw today would not want Zelensky to be their business partner, including me. And I've been to Ukraine 9 times since the war started. I met with him this morning. President Trump I talked to last night, he was upbeat about the deal. I've never been more proud of President Trump for showing the American people in the world, you don't trifle with this man. He was very positive. He was very upbeat. He wanted to get a ceasefire. He wants to end the war. And Zelensky felt like he needed to debate Trump in the Oval Office. JD was awesome.
That is amazing. Like, Trump has bent these people into form. Like, if you listen to Rubio is like, we got to end the war. We got to end the war. This is about peace. Yeah. And it's like, is that Rubio saying that?
Yeah. No, Rubio is... he has not acted like how I have expected him to act at all.
No, Trump has bent these people into form. I have a foreign policy. I am hiring you to explicitly push my foreign policy. And JD Vance has been fantastic. That is Trump's pit bull. He is a Trump whisperer, like, meaning he articulates stuff that Trump is saying more eloquent and far more concise than Trump does. And so it's like, if Trump is sitting there, he is a much better communicator. Lindsey Graham said, I met with Zelensky 9 times. I've been to Ukraine 9 times. He said, I met with Zelensky this morning. I would not hire him to be my business partner, let alone, like, he just, hot potato dropped.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, there is a lot of people who have tried to represent this as some kind of a disaster, but the fact is, this is how a president should react to somebody who is ultimately getting something out of us and is snapping back for no real reason other than, like, they want more. Like, well, I'm sorry.
No, there is a reason. I mean, from Zelensky's point of view, it's like, you led me into this war.
Yeah.
You told me you were going to back me for as long as it takes. Hell, you told me I was even going to win. And now you're turning around and saying, I want half of everything that comes out of the ground, and you're not giving me anything for it. Like, I get it from his point of view.
Sure.
Yeah, right.
But it's also like literally us ensuring that things survive there. That's the other issue. It's like, yeah, we wanted a lot out of that deal, but they wanted a lot out of that deal, to be frank. The Biden administration, as far as I'm concerned, very much led them astray in terms of promises and in terms of, I mean, we did give them a lot of money for this war, and that was a big problem. And liberals, the supposed anti-war party, the Democrats,
there isn't one.
People, the people who were against Bush on the grounds of war, they decided that, war is great. Money comes from war. And so war is good. I mean, obviously it's more complicated than that. You have imperialism tied up into that interest very much. But at the same time, it's ultimately just, this party that claims to be one thing isn't that thing and proves that it's not that thing. And then somebody who, for whatever reason, and I'm not going to tell you, I think that all of Trump's reasoning here is correct. I think that there are miscalculations, because I think some of it has to do with diverting money to Israel, which I don't like.
Oh, really? You think it's that? See, I think, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think if we free up some resources in Ukraine, we end up with the ability to put some more resources in Israel. And I have a feeling that's part of where we're going with this. But there's also the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people dying, and so even from a practical standpoint, let's say I agree with empire. Let's say I think that all of that stuff is good and fine and we should be in control. From a practical standpoint, we shouldn't want hundreds of thousands of people dying purely from the perspective that it creates a situation in which there's instability, and also it makes us look bad because ultimately we're the ones funding it.
Right.
And I think that's not the reasons that I am personally opposed to war. I think that war is evil. I think that it's like the idea of hundreds of thousands of people dying for fighting over a thing where we're like, well, we just want to make sure that NATO is allowed to be up on Russia's border. So maybe one day we'll have the pressure to put them to crack up the nation and separate them a little bit more. It's like, I think that's terrible. I think that's just legitimately an awful reason to do anything that has dire consequences for anyone on any level. Like if 5 people died, that is not a good justification, you know?
Agreed.
Like, so, but even from that utilitarian perspective, like I said, it makes us look bad. We're funding this. We're creating. It's like from a utilitarian perspective, an empire that wants to maintain its power partly has to do so on image. And it's very hard to maintain that element of it, the ideological justification for us being the big country in the world. If it makes people's lives worse or removes their ability to have lives, that it creates discontent. And ultimately, like, just even from that perspective, it's not wise to just like randomly engage in wars as much as, like, let's say we could win this. Let's say we could fund Ukraine into being able to beat a country that, you know, is oil rich and has all the money that it needs to, even despite sanctions and everything that we could say about Russia. Let's say that we could win, that they could win. It's still not wise because you're still using their lives to advance what is clearly your agenda. And eventually that causes discontent with people. It's just, we can't be that. Even if you think that what the world is now is good and it should stay that way, you can't just engage in these like regime change wars and trying to maintain power in bases. There's 800 some military bases around the world, the United States. You can't maintain that with this sort of cavalier, we're in control, we can just kill or have people get killed for whatever reason, and it's fine. It eventually isn't fine, you know?
And by the way, and lose. Yes. And like, it's like you got all these people killed and didn't even win, right?
Yeah.
And
I was giving you a hypothetical scenario where that's not what's happening, but it is what's happening.
It's like, and you lose. And then to make it even worse, the boogeyman that you were terrified of is now not just a boogeyman, it is a superpowered boogeyman because it's been killing and dying for the last 3 years with a military that went from 150,000 to like 1 million men, battle hardened. And so it's like, not only did you lose, not only did you put all of this money out for that loss, not only did you get all these people killed, the thing that you were terrified of is monstrous at this moment.
It's much stronger now.
It's much stronger. And so it's like, what was it for? Like, I just, God, man, it kills me. Like, war is typically a bad thing. And I feel weird having to argue that this is a good thing that Trump is ending the war. And yet I find myself having to argue, hey, it's actually good that Trump is ending the war. Yeah, but he's an ogre. You say that to say what? You said to say what?
So what we have, what's good to have is a nice, well-spoken, soft-spoken man who causes more war. Like,
right.
That's what they want, obviously.
Right.
Like, to me, and I've said this many times, I just had a discussion with somebody who doesn't quite has kind of been out of politics for a while and doesn't really understand where Trump is coming from or why people like you or me would say Trump is doing something good at all, just because, you know, they're not really thinking about politics. They're doing things elsewhere in their life. And I kind of had to explain, like, you know, I don't agree with Donald Trump on a ton of stuff, but like, this is objectively the things that we want a president to do as long as there's a president. Like
Yeah.
we want less wars. We want more peace. And no, it's not ideal. The conditions that the this reduction in fighting, it's not ideal how it's coming about. It's not ideal where it's going to go, but escalating tensions is not what we want on the worldwide stage. It's just something that can only lead to worse and worse conditions for everybody on the planet. And we don't want that.
And they need to acknowledge that the reason why the U.S. is taking this position is because we lost. Like Trump wouldn't be taking this position if we won or if we were winning. He's taking a position because the U.S. lost. And his thought is, all right, we need to put this to bed. And as he was telling Zelensky, dude, your bargaining hand is improved by being with us. Meaning,
absolutely.
I can let you drop and collapse on the battlefield, or you can negotiate with us where we have more things to negotiate than the war. If you're sticking your negotiations specifically to the war, well, you have nothing to negotiate. You have no chips, you have no cards. If you're with us, okay, well, we can negotiate sanctions, we can negotiate Middle East policy, we can negotiate stuff about Iran, meaning there are far more things that we can put on the table to help Ukraine in the end from a bargaining position, as opposed to you just dying on the battlefield. And Zelensky is, flipping out at the president. It's just amazing. I've never seen anything like that. I swear.
I mean, that whole event, like they tried to act like Vance and Trump are bullying the guy, but like if you watch the whole thing, it's very clear that he's just he's trying the whole time, and he's trying to do it in a manner where he doesn't look like he's escalated it. Which to me, the passive aggression is much worse than aggression. I hate passive aggression.
Yeah,
nothing makes me more mad than passive
it's like
aggression.
Yeah, like own it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of and I think that's the reason why liberals have been saying, "Oh, he didn't try to start anything." It's like, no. You all know what gaslighting is and how to do it.
And by the way, he flipped out. I mean, it was a question that went to one of them, or some Trump was like last question, and when it came up with the deal, Zelensky said something. I mean, because he was annoyed, right? From his point of view.
Yeah, he was annoyed and he was getting snippy.
Yeah, exactly. He wanted security guarantees. Trump kept telling him no. They kept telling him no. And he flipped out and then gets into a back and forth where Trump is like shouting him down because it's just fascinating.
It was, I got to say, I haven't seen anything like that. My entire life at this point. Like you never see world leaders in the Oval Office having a peace meeting that ends in them yelling at each other.
Yeah, usually that stuff is behind the scenes. And Vance even pointed out, it's like, dude, this is not the place to have this conversation. Like meaning having this conversation from the press like this, it's not the point. Vance though, he went after Keir Starmer. He went after Zelensky directly, where he is like literally in the man's. I am fascinated by the dynamic. When Trump first picked Vance, I remember Malik was like, this pick sucks. It's like, this is not the guy. And over time, Malik was warming to him. And for me, look, I know in domestic, I'm not going to get anything I want in a domestic sense. Sure. I do like it a bit where his attack dog, who can coherently make a point, makes that point directly to Zelensky, almost like an intervention. Like, you are losing. How are you talking to me right now about this, like this? Oh, it's fascinating.
SNL was doing this to make fun of him, but you just reminded me of the Willy Wonka thing.
Uh-huh.
You lose. Like they had Vance literally do the Willy Wonka line to make fun of Vance, and it's no, that's kind of what happened here.
Yeah, it's literally what happened, right? You can't even make a parody of it. Like the event itself is a parody. Ron DeSantis, I want to get your take on this. I'm fascinated, and I really want to get your take on this. Listen to DeSantis. He's coming out with a new initiative about property taxes.
Subject their citizens to higher taxes, such as higher property taxes, to pay for these spending habits. And these property taxes, it's like you buy a home, you buy land, maybe you buy the home outright, but maybe you pay off a mortgage over 30 years. And then, okay, you've paid off the mortgage, you bought the land, you've been taxed many times. It's like, is it your property or not? Just for being on your property, you got to write a check to the government every year. You're basically paying rent to the government to live on your own property. And our homestead exemption is not strong enough to help these folks because the property gets assessed so high. And that's the thing. If you buy a home for $300,000, and you know there's certain tax, well then what? 10 years later, they say it's worth 700,000. And so, and they say, you know, there's homestead stuff that helps protect you to a certain extent, but you're paying more. And a lot of people can't afford that. So I think that that's a big issue. And I know we're going to be really looking at ways to bring people relief from that, because I think it's been really something that's pinching a lot of homeowners, particularly seniors on fixed income. But the reality is people have seen, and this is not the state, we don't control this, you know, we've not allowed any of that stuff to happen. We've been cutting taxes, but people have seen their property tax liability go up over these last.
Give me your take on this. As from a lefty point of view, where he is effectively making this argument like, look, people buy their houses and then they have to pay these exorbitant prices to the government going forward for 30 years or forever, I suppose. And it's like, that's effectively rent going to the government. And people who are older, especially if you're talking about Florida, where you have a lot of older residents in Florida, maybe they can't afford it. I mean, they end up on Social Security after purchasing their house. And granted, some of these people are rich, right? So if you're talking about a $20 million house, okay, that guy can afford it.
Yeah.
But if you talk about just a regular average person, let's say my mom has a house, or my grandmother, good example. My grandmother had the house since a year after I was born. And she had that house the entire time, paid the house off. And then it becomes, okay, now you have to pay property taxes on the house for the foreseeable future. But the person is only making Social Security wages. Okay, so now how do you pay for the house? My mom had to sell that house because she couldn't afford it when my grandmother passed. Because again, you have to continuously pay property tax on the house. You have to. What do you take for that? He's a Republican, so I'm skeptical by definition. I assume this is something for the rich. But is this one of those things like no tax on tips? Is it a positive? Give me your lefty take on this, because I don't quite know. I might be missing something.
To me, he is speaking to something that actually does pinch a person's pocket. Lots of P's in that sentence. But it does actually do that to a normal person who is not rich. To me, when I hear this kind of stuff, I know that there's a lot of nuance, because you don't really have the ability to not have taxes, at least as long as we have the economic system we have. We have an economic system where, in order for there to be social services, resources have to be allotted to the government. And in order to have resources allotted to the government, we have to pay into the government on some level.
Right.
But ultimately, like if we're talking long-term Star Trek utopia stuff, what he's saying here is something that really shouldn't exist. If we're going to be completely clear, if we had an economic system that worked, this wouldn't be even something we're talking about. That's the way I look at it. I see this, and yes, he's describing a real problem, but ultimately, like you said, Ron DeSantis is somebody who is going to be searching for solutions for rich people.
Yes.
So it's not going, while he is outlining a problem that affects people who have less money, which, by the way, a lot of those people aren't even allowed to own property. So it's not even, we're in a point where 50% of renters can't afford rent. Like we're progressively getting further and further away from the ability to even get screwed by the government in this way.
Because when I heard this, my first thought was like, yeah, but why do I care? I don't own a house.
Yeah.
And the majority of people don't own a house. And so it's like, it puts me in mind of the argument when they talk about paying off student loans. And you have some people who are like, well, I don't have student loans, so why do I care about this? Why am I for this? I feel like that about it, but I don't want to feel like that about it because that's cynical if I am getting it wrong, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to be that guy who says, well, why should she get $15 an hour? I do this and I only make $15 an hour, as opposed to we should both be making more.
Yes.
I feel like this is a policy for the rich. I could be wrong, but I feel that way because that seems to be the direction that Republicans always go. Like, so Trump wants to pass tax cuts. Okay, he's going to increase my taxes, but he's going to cut the taxes for the rich.
He's going to increase your taxes, or money's going to be worth less, so the taxes just hurt you more.
Yes.
one way or the other.
Yeah.
So
I guess that's my point with this. Is this yes or no if you were in Florida? for this? I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sorry. I'm just
I lived in Florida for several years, and I rented the whole time. So I don't know. It wouldn't affect me in any way. So materially, I can't really give you like an invested answer. Do you know what I probably, I don't know if I will ever own a house. Like I even do well economically speaking, but like it is not wise for me to purchase a house. First off, the houses are crazy expensive at this point in my life. They're cost way more than they should cost. And second off, I just get put in the same situation in terms of rent where I'm paying into something for 30 years and I'm 40. I'll be 70 when I pay off a mortgage. So it's like, I don't know. Is that really worth it at this point? I really don't know. But if I owned property in Florida, it would, I'll say this, it would signify that I'm doing a lot better economically than I currently am. And I would guess that I would probably be for that, because the point that I would have to be at in order to own property in Florida, I would have to be in the area that would probably benefit most from whatever DeSantis cooks up. So
I don't think I would take issue with this if there was a cutoff. Like if it was people who make
I completely agree with you. Like give it to it for up to a certain value of property. Like I mean, granted, it has to index to inflation, because if we index everything to inflation and everything was just tied to like a fixed set of value that is created by labor, ultimately, we would see a very different economic situation in terms of debt and all of these types of things. I don't think this kind of thing would be actually something that we're afraid of the unintended consequences of. But yeah, no, I think it wouldn't bother me, but like part of that is that internally I can't even imagine owning property.
I thought about it through the lens of, okay, I don't trust Ron DeSantis.
No, I don't either.
I'm assuming this is for the rich somehow.
It probably is.
If there was a cutoff of, if you make less than a certain amount, then this comes into play. Then no issue with it. But see, that's the rub. As you pointed out, the government needs money to operate. And when Donald Trump is doing the no tax on tip stuff, the thing was like $10 trillion or $20 trillion, some insane number. Even though
over 10 years, it really adds up.
Yeah. Even though as a lefty, I'm like, I'm okay with that. Like, meaning, how can I say this? My bias is that I want more money in people's pockets, especially people who are poor. And somebody who's a waiter may make $2.50 an hour. And let's say for the moment, though, that with tips added, they make $60,000 an hour. Okay, well, that means that everything beyond the $2.50 is just not taxed. And if you're talking about the overwhelming majority of people who work service jobs, that adds up. That
very much, because it's not just waiters, it's baristas, it's people selling you phones. Like some of those places have tip jars now. It's very weird. It's honestly, I saw one in one of those places and I was like, a tip jar?
It's like, why is this here? Why is this here? You're not getting a tip from me.
I was like, that's, but everywhere you go, you have a little tip thing in the, everybody's using the tablet thing now to take your money, and it's got a tip thing, and they all want tips,
And YouTube. Everybody that gives is effectively a tip, right? I mean, like,
okay, I'm for it. I'm for it.
Right, exactly.
I'm for it.
Now, what's interesting about this is the same impetus.
Super chats are tax free. Come on, yes.
That was my thought. I mean, my thought was like,
let's
okay,
go.
Tips. Super chats are tips. Okay, so now this puts us in the same boat that rich people are in, where they don't want taxes, even though it hurts the government for not having taxes.
I'm with it. Yes, it is. But at the same time, it's not because you or I are rich.
I know, but we're talking about a policy that's going to add like $30 trillion in 10 years.
Well, yes. And this is the problem fundamentally. Then you have to start thinking about it. Like the problem isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily the tax. Like tax itself is not necessarily the problem. It's the economic system that's the problem. That's set up this way that we need to do things to poor people like this in order to sustain programs that help poor people. You get what I mean? Like we need to hit, like the reason you or I would be invested in that super chat thing is because in theory, traffic itself doesn't really pay that much. Like, so we rely on, like, I rely on things like Patreon or super chats. I don't do a lot of live, but like I get the super thanks, which is the video equivalent of that. That's also a tip. And if all that is covered as non-taxable income, like that would be awesome. I would be so happy about that, because seriously, that would, I work in a job, as do you, we work in a job that we aren't really given the ability, because, you know, in a traditional job where you work an hourly wage, you know what is taken out, because it's taken out of your paycheck by your employer and it's put aside for your taxes. You often get a tax return.
Right.
I don't. I pay money into into the IRS every year because I make money and none of that is withheld. Right. And often I need that money. I need it now. And I really, all people need the money now. Whatever money they can get from where they get their money, they need it. Like, it's not like as much, like I said, I'm doing economically well, but it's not like I live in a world of vast abundance in which I can press the button and the thing materializes for me. I don't get that. I don't have that, you know? So yeah, I mean, the contradiction there, it's class. Like, the taxes are ultimately something that benefits the owning class, the financial capital that is, you know, basically making an economy based on circulating debt. Like, that's essentially the world we live in. That's how the economy is managed here. And most of the value generation is done imperially throughout the world by, you know, economically or just straightforwardly conquering some other nation and having it subordinate to our country.
No, man, I agree with you.
We need change. We need a government of action that fights for working families, as my colleague Caleb Maupin always says.
I mean, we do. But this is kind of a phony way to do it, right? I mean, like, oh God, man, I hate saying that because you're right. It's when I was doing the job on the radio, okay, where they pull taxes out, it's a regular job. The moment that job goes away, okay, now you're trying to figure it out without a paycheck. And the amount that you get from YouTube is so, I don't know, but is very small.
It's not big for me either.
Yeah, it's not big, right? So you're barely making ends meet all of a sudden, immediately, the moment that you lose the job. I have
other employment I do on top of everything else.
Oh, well, good.
That's how I make ends meet.
Well,
I couldn't make ends
meet so fast, because when we lost the job, it was like October 15th, and it was like, okay, this is it. No more paychecks, no more anything else. It just all stopped. And so it's like you have to unravel your life because you're stuck at your apartment for another 2 weeks. You're paying DC prices for everything for those 2 months. And it's like, oh, this is painful. It's bleeding. I'm bleeding. And then you're like, okay, well, I need to build up the channel and everything else. So I guess my point is the no tax on tip stuff would be a big deal. But it's $30 trillion. Like, how do I
by the way, is used again to like, essentially it exists to make the lives, those people's lives easier. And I'm using the scare quotes very intentionally here because those programs are also often contingent on means testing or things like that. But allegedly they're taking the money to put money in the same people's pockets.
Yes.
So like, those programs are necessary. Like, at this point, there's people that rely on them. SNAP, for instance, it is not something I would advocate cutting in any way.
Right.
But at the same time, if the people who are on SNAP, a lot of those people are service workers or Uber drivers, by the way, they're in a similar tax situation. A lot of those people work those types of jobs. If they didn't have that extra amount taken out of their pocket at whatever point, would they need SNAP? I don't know.
Oh, that's the interesting thing. And that's the Republican argument, right? They want people working. And because they want people working, they want more money in their pockets. I guess the catch is this something that the American public is going to be on board with?
No, because we don't know the consequences. That's the thing. We could say all day long, like, would they need SNAP? I'm saying that as a hypothetical. Like, are we just circulating money for the sake of it? it's a valid question, but ultimately, would I advocate for getting rid of SNAP? Absolutely not, because it is a keen possibility that the answer is yes, they would still need SNAP.
Yeah. Yes,
but still, the problem here is that we have a system that necessitates these types of contradictions. These aren't things that we can avoid, and there's not going to be an answer for it until we address these things at a fundamental economic system level. Like there are aspects of what we live in that absolutely cannot persist if we want to solve these issues. If we want to keep these issues around, which, by the way, I think we know of two parties that do, the ones that control everything. If we want to resolve anything, we have to make changes in terms of how things work. And that's a discussion that's very difficult to have in short terms, because it's not something that anybody agrees on. Like, there are people that will, like a lot of people will tell you, yes, things absolutely have to fundamentally change. Well, how? Well, we just have to destroy 1/3 of the government. It has to be gone. And it's like, well, I get that on some level, because again, the same conversation we're having revolves around the same kinds of contradictions, but that's also thinking of government in the exact same way we are at the moment. And if we started fundamentally changing things, there's no guarantee that government looks like it looks right now.
Right. No, really good point. Let's go to polling, and this will be the last thing. CNN.
Polling.
Yes. Love it. So CNN did polling on Donald Trump on whether or not the American public accepts what's taking place currently. I mean, look, Donald Trump has been hyperactive. He has been going, firing workers left and right, sending letters saying, hey, tell me what you do for a living, which is just wild to me that you're sending like 1 million letters or something like that. They have been going after cutting all over the place, even trying to cut the military budget at this point. Apparently military stocks collapsed because Trump was going after them. Tariffs, ending program. He has been hyperactive. Doge has been all over the place. And so the CNN was yeah, right. So CNN was like, okay, American, what do you believe of Donald Trump's actions? So this is, I'm not going to show CNN reporting on it because they're going to cut my video, but I will show the polling results itself.
Okay.
And this is, CNN could be dicks about the whole.
This is CNN's polling.
This is CNN poll. So they conducted this poll on February 24th to 28th. And it says, effectively, do you approve or disapprove of of Trump? 90% of Republicans said yes. 90% of Republicans said yes, he's great. 10% disapprove. Independents, 41% approve, 59% disapprove. And of Democrats, 10% approve, 90% disapprove. So what's really is the middle, the independents, where you get the 59, 41%. Then they asked whether they think the country is going in the right direction or wrong direction. 45% said the wrong direction. 39% said the right direction. 15% are unsure. Who are these unsure people? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, oftentimes when that poll takes place, that number is usually higher about going in the wrong direction. I've seen that number going up to as high as 70%.
Yeah.
So even though the wrong direction is 45%, usually that number is much higher.
Yes, very much. I mean, you're an independent for a reason, because you do not see the Democrats or Republicans as doing the right thing.
Exactly. So Trump at 39% is not ridiculous in comparison to what it was like under Biden or something like that. What do you think is going on? Do you think the American public, that he's split? So my hypothesis is that Trump is splitting the baby on this stuff. Usually the idea is that the left is more prone to not wanting wars, whereas now that's not the case. You have warmongers on the right who's on the left who are still egging on the war. Whereas in this case, you get Donald Trump saying, I want to stop wars. I don't want to start them. So on some level, I would imagine the American public says, yes, we want to stop wars too. We don't want to start wars either. So maybe he gets a contingent who says, okay, he is doing what he said he's going to do on this front. But then they see him firing workers and they're like, okay, we don't like that. We don't like you going after Medicaid. We don't like you going after public services. That's not why you were elected. So he ends up with this kind of bifurcation of people who, in some respects, like them, in some respects, don't. I put myself in that box where I'm like, internationally, great job. I
Yeah,
hate what they're doing to
internationally, I'm
Israel,
quite happy
but
with what's going on with him.
Domestically, trash.
Yeah, it's not good.
No, it's horrific. Give me your take on that, though. I mean, because I would imagine the American public bought somebody in because they wanted fundamental change. And when they see RFK or when they see Tulsi Gabbard, they think that's different. That's not the same.
Or just Trump yelling at Zelensky, man. That's
even
like
that,
I said, I've never seen that in my life.
Exactly.
That's different. It's arguable that to some people that it's not great, but like that's also, in my opinion, pretty subjective. If it's something that, like, objectively, what happened, in my opinion, trends us away from war at least a little bit. But that's a different subject. In terms of, I think, how people see this. First off, you're 100% correct. Usually, the independents, regardless of who is in, will more or less be more discontent than that. That is, at least in terms of my memory, which is not, it's fallible. I admit, but I seem to remember
the wrong direction thing. Like in the wrong direction poll, that number's like usually 70%. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I could be
exactly.
But I thought that was much higher.
That's what I'm saying. Generally, in my memory, it's always been much higher than that, which to me says these polls are a little more simple than they need to be. I think that when we're asking questions like we're going in the right direction, we're trying to average out things that are almost competing interests. Like if we're talking about, let's say, domestic issues, if you ask me if we're going the right direction or wrong direction, I would say I would lean towards wrong direction. And that's to varying extents in certain areas. If we asked about foreign policy, I'd say we're going in the right direction. How do you average that out in a single question? Is the country moving in? And I think that is part of what, again, I was going to, one of the things I was going to say is this is a CNN poll. So it's going to be most likely biased towards the left. It's going to most likely be showing us results that are as kind to the left as possible. And those are the kinds of questions that allow them to present numbers that favor them more. They ask questions like that, which are designed to avoid the nuance. I say this a lot when I talk to you, Jamarl. The average American person is more like a Joe Rogan than like a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden. Joe Rogan is a very eclectic person. He has some views that are very left-wing. He has some views that are very right-wing. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a much more real person. Like, they don't think about things like, oh, it's left-wing, it's right-wing. They think about things like, well, what does this mean to me?
Yeah.
And as much as I do think it's important to recognize that, you know, what the left's agenda is, what the right's agenda is, it's much more important to understand that there is a lot of nuance in the average person that is more or less, they aren't given credit for being able to think about things individually. And this is part of how they control that by asking a question that's it's too generalized to give a real answer. As far as I'm concerned, that's not a real answer. Because if you talked about it domestically, it wouldn't look like that. If you talked about it foreign policy, it also wouldn't look like that, because I have a feeling the people who have brought that down in the 50s, the wrong direction, who have brought that down in the 50s are probably people who are talking about it thinking from a worldwide perspective. I don't want World War III, and it looks like this is going to divert us away from that. Like, that would be why I would answer, I think we're going in the right direction foreign policy wise. I think we're doing things that are diverting us from World War III. I think when Biden was in office, it looked pretty clear we were headed in that direction. And that scares people like myself who actually pay attention to the world stage, because ultimately, if we end up in World War III, there's the everlasting possibility of nuclear escalation. That would end the world. I don't want that.
That's a bad thing.
Yeah, that's bad. It's not good at all. So I would easily be able to answer from a foreign perspective that. And I have a feeling that there are a lot of people who are thinking, well, you know what? The domestic stuff, it doesn't work, but I'm not going to see nuclear war if this is the direction of foreign policy we're going to take. I think that there's a lot of people who probably answered, and that's probably what brought that down from 70. But it's, again, it's not an accurate view of really what's going on, because if we do have a president who's not bringing us into wars, that's great. But are they gutting everything that makes life in the United States possible?
It's like,
that's
how do I
not
answer
good.
that? Yeah. I might be like 51-49.
It's really important to separate these things too, because clearly they're not the same thing.
No,
and CNN, I think, in order to be able to present this as fully negative, rather than having it categorically like domestic versus foreign, because you'd see, I think more people are probably favorable towards this foreign policy than not, at least that are informed in any way, which, by the way, at this point is a lot of people. A lot of people have turned away from these mainstream news stations, more so than just like the Republicans at this point too. I would argue there's a lot of people who identify as Democrat or even leftists that have turned away from mainstream news, and for good reason. It's biased.
Yeah.
It's propaganda also. It's always biased towards power. That's the thing.
They pretend that they're not, which is always the aggravating one, right? Like, have you seen the headlines? And I'll end it on this. The headlines around the world where they're like, Donald Trump has gut independent news by killing USAID. It's like, dude, if it's getting USAID, it's not independent news. Like 9 out of 10 media organizations.
Radio Free Asia, the independent radio station.
Right.
The CIA propaganda rag that
it's like
isn't
totally
officially a CIA propaganda rag. They're actually officially independent. We're gutting independent media.
It's so ridiculous. Peter, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate talking to you, Peter. I always enjoy these conversations.
I always do as well, Jamarl. Thanks for having me on.
Coffin. He's a journalist with 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In the book, Custom Reality and You, they explore a world where profit is the driving force. You can follow Peter on YouTube and Twitter at Peter Coffin and purchase their book on Amazon. Peter, Ouroboros.
Woke Ouroboros.
Woke Ouroboros. A snake that eats his own tail. One of the last books. Are you working on any other books?
I am. I'm working on one called The Road to Fandom. It's I'm going to be asserting that our primary social ideology is fandom. It's essentially a subset of consumerism. Like, where everything's, we talk about everything's team sports. It's really because everything's been sort of subsumed by the fandom marketing paradigm. Everybody's a consumer advocate for whatever cause, person, politician, or whatever.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of true. I mean, it's like our identity, it's almost like we want to put it on out, like whatever's internal, we want to have this stuff out. But we have gotten to this kind of weird, like, it's the weirdest thing in the world where you see somebody like an Instagram or influencer or like a TikTok influencer or whatever, and they act like they're a celebrity. Like, and I mean that like in a sense of like I saw one woman, she was driving a car, she hit somebody while on TikTok, and she looks at the camera and says, well, here's your content for the day. Now, she didn't mean to hit the person, but it is mind-blowing. But like, the person is in an accident, all of it's been recorded, and then she looks down after having an argument with the people outside and says, all right, here's your content. And it's like, whoa, that's wild. Like, if you really think about it, that's wild.
It is. It's nuts. It's crazy. Like, we have a need for identity and community, and they've essentially, the market has figured out a way to tell us how that's supposed to work.
And market that identity as just your basis of interaction. Exactly. Like, when you're on, like, you have a identity that you need to maintain. It's wild.
It's something we can talk about another time. I know I'm extending this. Sorry.
Oh, you're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine. Peter, thank you, my man. You have a good day.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we have come to the end. We've come to the end. Let's go to chats. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, bigoted. Also, please hit the like button. I am trying to grow. I am trying to hit the 40K. We are very close to the 40K. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do when I hit the 40K. But we are close. We are approaching. We're like a badger stalking. So close. Let me get to the thing. Mr. Ripley, recall Hunter Biden did something similar to what Zelensky did in the presser. The plea deal for his gun charge was in the bag. Hunter Biden lied about it in court, which pissed off the judge. Yes. Just so the audience knows what Mr. Ripley is talking about. if you remember, they were trying to ignore the Hunter Biden stuff, the Justice Department. You had whistleblowers who came forward and pointed out the Justice Department is blowing off this case. They don't want to deal with the case. They don't even let us go to Hunter Biden's house. We were being barred from going after researching evidence of this case. Because of that, Weiss was embarrassed. He was put on the spot, and he got super active in pushing the case forward. That case was going on for 5 years where it languished. And finally, they pushed it through. Weiss, effectively, they made a deal with Hunter Biden. Everything was wrapped into the charge, where he was only going to get a slap on the wrist. Hunter Biden goes into court, bitches and moans about it, whines about it. The judge asks a few questions. Are you going to charge him with something later on? Meaning, Hunter Biden was guilty as sin on a fair charge, but fair charges were only used to go after Republicans. His lawyer said, no, this is everything. His lawyer was right. They were trying to get rid of it. The prosecution, because he's being put on the spot now, talking to the judge, he says, well, maybe we might come back later. Now, this is outrageous. You either charge everything or this piecemeal stuff you can't really do. If I take a charge piecemeal, then if you come back later, I might admit to something that you bring into the other charge. Now, also, Hunter Biden's lawyer had already negotiated that all of this stuff was supposed to go away. So when Hunter Biden hears this, they say, well, we're not taking the deal. Now, this is insane. The entire point of the deal was to get rid of all of it. And most likely they would have gotten rid of all of it. They were just being put on the spot. So the lawyer says something else. So the judge was like, okay, well, this case is killed. In which case, the prosecution rebrings the charges. And this time uses the laptop in order to go after Hunter Biden, basically trying to put him in, not necessarily in a cage, but was going after him. He also had the case in California that he was going to have to deal with, was a tax charge, was going to be worse than the charge he got hit with in regards to the gun charge. Joe Biden didn't allow the sentencing to come in. He effectively gave him a pardon before any sentencing took place. Hunter Biden most likely knew his dad was going to give him an out. So from his point of view, I'm not accepting anything. I want to skate without my dad getting involved. But if my dad needs to get involved to save my ass, fair enough. I've been living off my dad's name for God knows how long. What's the big deal for this? Dad will be dead in a few years. So he has no negative with him pardoning me, which is exactly what Joe Biden did, which is exactly what everybody assumed Joe Biden would do. Nobody believed that Joe Biden was going to let Hunter Biden go to jail. Hunter Biden could have went to jail, especially for the tax charges in California. Mr. Riffley, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Mudchat. Welcome to the family, Mudchat. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the family. Alexander G. Tax-free. I doubt, but here you go. It will not be tax-free. Donald Trump was talking about this thing on no tax on tips. He ran on it during his campaign. Now, a lot of people like the idea for obvious reasons. If you're a waiter and you make $2.50 an hour, which is some of the waiters make, but you get a lot of tax money. And so let's say you get $60,000 a year. But you can imagine that if only $2.50 an hour is coming out from the company, that everything above that is tax. I mean, it's tips. So under normal circumstances, you're supposed to declare all of that as income, in which case you have to pay taxes on it. So the majority of jobs in the United States are service jobs. They don't pay well. Service jobs. So you can imagine the impact that would have on either people on Social Security, people who make very little, let's say like in a service job where most of the money is tips, people who are on YouTube who are barely making ends meet. It's big. It's big. The problem with it is that because you have so many people on service jobs, you can imagine that is going to be trillions of dollars that the government is not getting. So for Donald Trump saying, I want to cut taxes, I want to cut the deficit, we're spending too much money. Okay, fair enough. But doing that effectively impacts the deficit significantly. Significantly. So you're effectively going to blow a hole in the deficit that you, Donald Trump, is saying he wants to close on some level. Now, the notion that you're trying to close it is nonsense. They're giving themselves massive tax cuts themselves. So the part of the reason that they're trying to cut these programs is in order to give themselves tax cuts. So, and to make it worse, increasing taxes on us to give themselves tax cuts. Sir Bike Salat, look up Strong Towns Land Value Tax. Thank you, Sir Bike Salat. I will. Like I said, I asked Peter the question about DeSantis because I didn't know. I know DeSantis, I know Republicans, I know they like to give themselves tax cuts at the expense of us. And so anything that we get is usually negligible. So if DeSantis is pushing a policy like this, I assume that this is on some way favoring the rich more than the poor. Yeah, that's my assumption. I don't trust any of them. What is this? Ranulph Whitewolf. Ranulph Whitewolf. Great stream, Jamal. I consider myself right wing, but I agree with you on a lot. Let's unite and stop all the bloodshed. Saw you on Garland stream. Oh, thank you, man. Look, I would tell you this. I am hard on the left, even to the point of we should control our services like electricity, all this stuff. But I've evolved on some of the stuff. Liberals have lost their minds. And I find myself being able to talk to a Republican, even though I may disagree with them, a bit easier because liberals, they've lost their minds. They've somewhere along the way, they decided that they are right. They're morally, ethically superior. And at the point where you take that position that you're morally, ethically superior, it is hard for anything to get through. So if you're talking about trans kids, they believe they're right. If you're talking about war, they believe they're right. I mean, for God's sake, they had Liz Cheney running around the country with Kamala Harris. And it's like, okay, Liz Cheney was seen, or Dick Cheney was seen as the devil. Liz Cheney is not that much different. She has a vagina. That's pretty much it. How are you justifying this? It's bizarre. Same thing in Europe. I can show you videos where all of these liberals are out there holding the Ukrainian flag as they work to destroy Ukraine by their policies. It makes no sense. They're in a fantasy land. And the same thing is true in Europe. When you're talking to liberals in Europe, I don't mean to bring her up, but we got into a pretty vicious argument. And it's frustrating because they're living in a fantasy. Like if I have a conversation with you and I say, you've lost the war. You've lost the war. You did everything you could with sanctions. You did everything you could with oil and gas. You did everything you could with military. You dumped all the military forces in that you could. And Russia withstood it and continues to advance. You've lost. And the only thing that can happen now is you putting kids to get shot in the face, or you just wait until your military fundamentally and utterly collapses. That is the position to which you're in. And you tell me, yeah, but Putin's a bad guy. And so I don't want to make a deal. Okay, let's say that's true. You've collapsed on the battlefield. You've lost. Do you really want to keep these people in getting killed in a war that you've lost? This war has been decided. You've lost. Yeah, but Putin's a bad guy and Putin invaded. Okay, so what do you want to do? I want peacekeepers into the country. Okay, well, you've lost the war. And those peacekeepers are going to get shot in the face. They're not peacekeepers. They're NATO troops that are going to be a tripwire. Russia is smart enough to know that they will get shot in the face immediately. You're going to start a third world war. I know, but, we should have the Budapest Memorandum. Okay, again, you didn't attend to the memorandum. You overthrew the government in 2014. So any notion of you attending to the memorandum is nonsense. You didn't do it. You didn't care about the Minsk agreements. You didn't care about the Istanbul agreements. You didn't care about any of that stuff. You have lost your ability to dictate anything. Doesn't exist. I know, but we should. Okay. It's that. And then it's these European idiots going and having a conversation with themselves as if they can control any of the events on the ground. You have no hard power. You're bitching and begging America because you don't have the capability of doing it. And yet Starmer would go and he would say this. I think I might have closed it. But Starmer would go give a speech saying they're giving security guarantees to Ukraine. How? You and the soccer hooligans, military that you have at your disposal, it's outrageous. It's completely outrageous. All right. I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. All of you and all of your contributions make this content what it is. You have my deepest appreciation for all of you to watch, all of you that give. You can support this content through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, memberships. All of those things are deeply appreciated, and you help me tremendously. I need to make moves. On March 6th, I will be moving from this location. It is my plans, full transparency. I don't know where I'm going to be. I am probably going to be in Richmond for the very least a few months or maybe another month. After Richmond, it is cheaper, weirdly enough, for me to go abroad. And so I may actually go abroad and do the show from there for a couple of months. That's more of a price issue. I also don't want to be locked down in Richmond. And if I have to sign a lease, I'd be locked down for the year. I don't know where another job is going to come up because I'm applying for radio jobs across the country. And so I don't want to be locked down in Richmond if a job comes up in New York or if a job comes up in Georgia. Hence, the leaving the country, which is cheaper and gives me more time to figure out what I want to do before locking myself down in any particular location. The show will go on. I'll still be doing the content either way, so nothing's going to affect that. I'm just giving you a heads up if the environment just all of a sudden changes. Yeah, this has been a challenge. It's been a challenge. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. You can support the content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats. And you guys have a phenomenal day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 105. Signing off.